Good morning, everybody. Woo! Okay, we've got good audio this morning. I'm Representative Sue Mullen. I am the chair of this committee, and I am officially opening the interim study meeting on House Bill 1229. This is a study on whether or not we need a study, as we affectionately refer to House Bill 1229, the study of the study bill. So for those of you who are joining us for the first time, this is the third time that we have met. We have been dealing with a number of food-related, school meals-related bills that came up last session and taking a peek at whether or not we feel that there are aspects to those bills, though they were not adopted this past session, whether or not there were aspects to the bill that warranted further investigation, and ultimately we will make a recommendation on whether or not we think legislation is warranted. So prior to today, we heard from New Hampshire Hunger Solutions, and I think we may hear from them again today. We heard from the Department of Education. We heard from the American Heart Association. Today, we are privileged to have our farm to school people with us. And without any further ado, I'm going to introduce Representative Alexis Simpson, who is going to kick off their presentation.
Thank you, Representative Mullen. It's good to be here with you all again. Yes, so I thought that I would start us off by reminding people of what was behind the bill that we proposed on the Farm to School Reimbursement Policy Bill, and then open it up to insights and information from the folks behind me who are all stakeholders in this policy. So last winter, we brought to you a farm to school reimbursement bill. This kind of program, as you know, would increase healthy local food options available to New Hampshire school children. It would help us build supply chain resiliency and support our New Hampshire economy by increasing the amount of food New Hampshire schools purchase from local farms. So since last spring, we have continued to work with stakeholders to discuss the best ways to move forward with this idea. We've also gathered more information from around the country about what makes a good program work and to identify solutions to some of the challenges that we have seen, some of which came up in our conversation with this committee previously. We have a strong farm to school program in some districts in this state, which is good news, but we want all children to have access to healthy, nutritious local food. And some of the experts and advocates here from the child nutrition community and other stakeholders will talk more about the importance of child nutrition and how this bill fits into that. They'll be able to answer technical questions that you have about this farm to school program, about child nutrition, and about the local food system. So we're looking forward to hearing some of your questions, or all of your questions, and incorporating that feedback. But we also want to say that we've spoken in some detail with folks from the Department of Education and the Department of Agriculture, and already see some areas where we could simplify what we've been working on, which is great news, and we'll keep those conversations moving forward as well. We have already taken, would you like me to talk about some of those things, those specifics? Great. So we've already taken under advisement the feedback from the Department of Agriculture that the tiered system might be difficult to administer, especially at the beginning of of instituting this policy. So I don't know if you remember, speaking of details, I know how many bills you all saw, and thank you for that work, but I'm not going to ask you to remember those details. Let me real quickly say we had talked about a tiered system of reimbursement where we would reimburse New Hampshire farms at a higher level than we would reimburse farms outside of New Hampshire that were providing local food. I do want to say that there's been years worth of collaboration among our states in the region to develop regional food systems and to approach food security and resiliency from a regional perspective. because in New Hampshire, we don't produce a big percentage of our own products. This is the reason we thought of that tiered system in the first place. However, we see the wisdom in sourcing all products for the Farm to School Reimbursement Program from New Hampshire farms, fishers, and producers. So we'd like to see if we can make that work. And we also hope that this will dovetail with the Department of Agriculture's work to build up and strengthen our New Hampshire food systems infrastructure. It's important to note here that at the beginning of the school year, our food service directors are still facing some supply chain issues, so that problem has not completely gone away. And then there was another piece of the bill about how the reimbursements would take place. And so we've begun the conversation with the Department of Education about how we could make that easiest for them and do it in a way that fits with the way they already reimburse for school meals in a continuous process instead of having a specific date every month that receipts are due. So, I don't know how those details would shape out exactly, but just to know we're working for what will be easiest for the Department of Education to make this program work, should the legislature decide that this policy is a good one, and should you all decide that this policy is a good one. So I want to remind you of one other piece of this bill, which is that much of our school nutrition money comes from the federal government, but only a fraction of each dollar goes to purchasing food itself. There are labor costs and equipment costs and infrastructure costs that are also part of that small amount of money that is paid for school meals every day. So as the bill was written last year, 2/3 of the money for the program would be federal and 1/3 would be from the state's general fund. We believe this is a worthwhile investment for the state. You'll hear testimony later about child nutrition, but I want to highlight at the outset that a study from the Rockefeller Institute tells us that for every dollar spent on school nutrition, there's a $2 return on that investment. Not only do our children benefit, but this is a fiscally responsible investment for the people of New Hampshire as well. So in closing, this reimbursement program would help strengthen New Hampshire's agriculture sector and regional food security. It will also help New Hampshire students understand the regional agricultural, geographic, social, and cultural aspects of our food system in New Hampshire. And now I'm eager to introduce everyone else, but also if you have questions specifically, this is probably a good time to do that as well.
Thank you. Representative Woodcock.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Madam Chairman. Sorry. It's been a while. For Good morning. How are you?
Good morning.
I just want to be sure I was clear. When you were speaking about the reduction or your presumed reduction in the tiered system, did I understand you to say that the out of state, the non-New Hampshire folks would be basically eliminated and be New Hampshire only? Did I already heard you say?
I want to say that's what we're considering.
Okay.
We have not fallen down on that yet because we have a lot of stakeholders in this process across the state, and they have a very good sense of what products and how much of each product we can produce in order to meet the needs of the program. And so we don't want to hamstring ourselves from the get-go, so we want to analyze that information first before we commit to only New Hampshire farming.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Yeah.
Representative Ellison.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks for your statement being here. I want to just go back to right at the end of your statement. You talked about a cost sharing of 2/3 federal, 1/3 state.
Yes.
Could you tell me, for my edification, what exactly that is and how much is 1/3 of the cost of that, which would be the state share?
Sure. So the goal at the beginning of this, and it's as I said, a lot of folks have been working on this for a while, like how do we increase our resiliency in New Hampshire, right? And so the goal was how do we get ourselves to have 10% of the food that we buy for schools to remain in the New Hampshire economy. And we know that when we spend the local dollar, a very high percent of it stays in our local economy. And so not to be sending all of our money across the country. And some of that money that we get to buy food, well, a lot of it comes from the federal government. And so we are trying to redirect $1.2 million from the federal money that we get for the cash per meal reimbursements
Okay.
to local farms.
And where does the 1/3 share state come in?
So that is, in order to get us to 10%, we would be asking another 600,000 from the general funds.
That's what I want to know.
Yes,
Thank you very much.
yes.
Other questions? All right, Representative Simpson, if you want to introduce who you brought with you, that would be great.
Definitely. So Representative Megan Murray is on the Environment and Agriculture Committee, and she's been working hard on this bill as well from that perspective. So she has a couple of things to share with you. And then Stacy Perslow is behind me from the Farm to School program, and she's been doing a lot of a deep study of what's going on in other states. So she's bringing some of that new information to us as well. And then we have one or two folks from the New Hampshire Hunger Solutions who have been working hard on this bill and program as well. Is anyone else? I think that's all for today. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yes.
Representative Murray, would you like to join or replace Representative Simpson at the mic?
Certainly join, not replace. Thank you for having me before the committee. My name is, for the record, Megan Murray. I am the Deputy Ranking Member in Environment and Agriculture. And what you have before me, before yourselves, is a map of the New Hampshire farm products map. And so this is just a general idea of what farms exist within the state of New Hampshire. What's out there. This is a website that has been put together by the University of New Hampshire's Cooperative Extension. And if you look at the left-hand side of it, as you're going down, it breaks them into categories. And we recognize that not all of these categories are available as farms to be purchased through schools. For example, some homesteads may not qualify for purchase through the school program for certain reasons. With that said, we truly feel that there is a network within our farm system community, whether it's a CSA, a CSF, it's local farms, it's wholesalers that have the opportunity to get food into the hands of kids locally sourced. And when we're talking about nutritional content that has a relevance to the daily lives of where kids are in their communities, as a parent and as an educator myself, I think that's a wonderful talking point to have with kids at either the lunch table or in the classroom or at home and say, hey, what did you get to try today? And so with that, we are really intentionally working on creating a network within the farm to school network that partnerships with what's already there in the agricultural community that is easier for our school food and nutrition folks to tap into. So with that, I'll happily try and answer any questions, but I know that there's other folks as well. Representative. Oh, sorry, Madam Chair.
Representative Woodcock.
Thank you, Madam Chair. You've forgotten how to.
Yes, no, yep.
Megan, the percentage of currently, I know that some of the local farms now participate in their own local programs with the local school systems. Do you have a guesstimation of what that is?
You know, that's a fairly good question. I'm happy to get that data for you, but I do know that Representative Simpson may have that information. But I will say that in my own community school system, when there's an opportunity to purchase apples, they do.
Okay.
I do know that I had a conversation with the folks at our school services, food service and nutrition as well, and they are eager to participate in a program like this because they truly do believe that, for example, we had a notice that it was due to some supply chain issues, they weren't able to source sun butter just recently. So I do think that there are true needs to sort of diversifying what we're talking about when we're talking about large scale food supplies. And then we have our smaller, more regional food supplies that really are crucial to the work that we're trying to do here.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Can I add real quickly?
Sure.
Absolutely.
That reminds me of something, which is that one of the things that the Department of Education will be sure to need in doing this program, should it come about, is some technology as well as staff. And when we're looking at other states, it's not clear exactly how much staff they would need, part-time to full-time person, not clear yet, but the technology is definitely clear, and some of that technology would help us have some data that we just don't have any way to collect at this point. So we don't really have a thorough sense of that, although I'm sure Stacy has some sense of that.
Representative Lakis.
Thank you. Do you know how much of the year our local produce will be able to continue supplying food?
That's a great question. And so obviously we know that in New Hampshire, we do not have year-round farming available to us. We do know that we have other methods of farming that extend our seasons, whether it's using hoops and hoop houses to do that extension, or if it's indoor aquaponics or agriculture. And there are some other things that are there. And in recognizing that, we do understand that there is not 100% a year-round source. But there are also, that is why we recognize that there would be a unique mixture between those types of supply chains. Yeah.
Representative Ford.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for taking our questions. I wonder about the capability of the state to provide storage and distribution of products. Now, my experience is not so much in growing crops in the ground so much as dairy farming. But I mean, dairy farming requires immediate cooling, storage, hauling in large containers down to a dairy, which meets the processing that day. And those kinds of imperatives, if you will, of that product. And I'm sure there are others for apples and whatever. I just have never raised apples. What is your role in that process? Is that something that's pushed off on the so-called delivery system, in other words, stores and whatever? I just wonder about preserving the product until it's consumed.
That's a fair question. And to your point, this was something the food service folks and I had discussed as well. And we have all recognized that there's been a tremendous growth in refrigerated trucking capabilities in the delivery services, even right down to the local CSAs and CSFs that can arrive directly to your doorstep. So to that end, much of that infrastructure is in place already to get the product from the farmer to the school system or to a distribution hub of sorts.
I'll just add that there are stakeholders that the Commissioner of Agriculture and others in his department are working with to increase our ability across the board, across the state, to increase the amount of storage we have. Because for a lot of crops, whether it cold crop squashes or apples or things like that, we could definitely use more storage in every sector, not just for the school nutrition sector. So that is definitely a challenge that the Department of Agriculture is looking at, and it sounds like has some real possibilities for joint work going forward with the folks that they're collaborating with, and some federal money as well. But we see this as really part of the whole food system in the state, just also both needing the storage and increasing the sector entirely, like increasing the demand in the agriculture sector, which helps improve the infrastructure. So does that answer?
Representative Lakis.
I was curious about the school end of this. Currently, since a lot of the stuff is fairly prepared when they get it, the time and effort to preparing lunches is not as great. And so the question is, when we're delivering fresh produce, are the school cooks, if you will, set up, prepared, and eager to be part of this?
Thank you for that question. You have certainly noted a truth across the state, which is that every school kitchen is different and has different capabilities. And some have greater kitchens, greater counter space, better knives than other schools have. And so right now, those challenges are largely met, in different ways as well. And I assume that the same would happen with the farm to school program. And sometimes that is doing the processing of the, let's call it a fruit or vegetable, doing the processing of the fruit or vegetable at a school that has greater capacity to do that and maybe the equipment to do that, and then moving it to schools that have smaller kitchens or, no storage space or something like that. So in the immediate future, I think it would be those kinds of fixes that are used. And then in the long-term future, try to equip each school to do kind of what they can. Yeah.
I have a question for you, ladies. In your discussions with the community or the state at large, do you have any sense of how many school districts are currently engaging with local farmers to purchase their products?
That is a great question. And I'm wondering, Representative Mullen, if this might be the time to ask Stacy Perslow from the Farm to School program to come forward. She'll have much better understanding of that than we do.
You could see it in my eyes. I could tell. All right, great. Thank you very much, representatives. Welcome, Stacy Perslow. Stacy, if you wouldn't mind pushing that.
That one?
Yeah.
Okay. I took some notes on some of the questions that were already asked and want to provide some more information there as well as answer your question. So the seasonality of food in New Hampshire is year-round. Obviously, tomatoes are on their way out, but storage crops are coming in. Winter squashes, carrots, potatoes, that can be procured most of the year. Proteins can be procured mostly year-round. Value-added dairy products are there year-round. So there's plenty of options for local food that schools can buy year-round, even though some things certainly have a shorter season. And as Alexis said, the Department of Ag is working to potentially get some ARPA funds that would help support some of the infrastructure issues that you had questions about, storage and transportation. I also wanted to mention, we also have a lot of hydroponics happening in the state. So the Loudon facility, there's a new facility that's going in up in Berlin that's going to be doing lettuce as well. So there's going to be year-round availability through new hydroponic growers. And we also have a food hub network. So Food Hub is a local business that aggregates and distributes local food. Which is something that hasn't always been here. So they have a web presence. You can order online. You can see what the farms have. So this would be the vehicle of how schools could order food through the various food hubs, Three River Farmers Alliance, Food Connects, Fresh Start Farms, Kearsarge Food Hub. They all aggregate, and most of them do distribution as well in certain regions of the state. So that would be one of the main vehicles of how schools can and would be purchasing local food. As to your question of how many schools participate in farm to school purchasing, that's a tough one. The USDA does a USDA farm to school census every couple of years. And the last census that was done, we didn't have a lot of participation from the schools, so it's voluntary to, answer a survey. And we didn't have a lot of participation this past census. So there's really not good data there. And with COVID, it was, just been a couple of very unusual school years for school food service. So personally, for the farm to school program, would hope to get back to doing my own census this school year to get a better sense of what what schools are doing. Because we have done it in the past, and schools buy apples is their number one food, local food that they buy, along with carrots and potatoes and lettuce and squashes. So over the years, schools have been doing local purchasing. Some may only get local apples, but some are doing quite a bit, as much as they can. So it's and some are doing nothing. So it's a real range of activities that the schools are engaged in.
So I have a question for you, Stacy. Who does it well? Is it Maine? Is it Vermont? Is it Idaho? Is there a state out there that is sort of pioneering this, or pioneered it 20 years ago and we just are catching up?
Yeah, 20 years ago, it really wasn't a thing. It's more of a farm to school as a national thing came into being in around 2004, and that's when the New Hampshire Farm to School program started. And it was New Hampshire Farm to School started with a grant, and there was some efforts on the Seacoast to get local food into schools. They worked with one farmer, one conventional distributor, and a handful of schools on the Seacoast to move local food in that way. It's a challenge because the school lunch program is the same across the country on how it functions. And there's a lot of requirements and guidelines of how you have to go about purchasing food and nutrition requirements related to school meal programs and the amount of funding that's available to support food purchasing. So there are good examples across the country. I didn't say there's any one state that's doing it better. I think some states have more infrastructure for farm to school than other states. So like Vermont has, their Organic Farming Association has a farm to school position. Their Department of Agriculture has a farm to school position. They have several nonprofit organizations dedicated to farm to school. So there's more resources and infrastructure in Vermont to do the kind of work. And of course, Vermont has a lot more farms than New Hampshire. So they do a pretty good job there. But we do have some pockets of good food purchasing. I know earlier this year, we heard some testimony from the Exeter School District, and they've been engaged in farm to school for many years. I work closely with the Oyster School District because I'm based at UNH and they're right there. And they were given, through a warrant article, extra money every year to buy local food for their school meals program because they know the value that it is for the kids and for the agricultural community over there. So that's sort of an exception that the community decided to give the school food service money just to buy local food. So that's kind of what we hope this bill would do, incentivize schools so they can get local, fresh, more nutritious food, support the local agricultural economy, support the farms in their community if they can. Sure.
I think you're off the hook.
Okay, thank you.
Representative Simpson, can I ask you a follow-up question? So when you talked about the technology that would be necessary for getting this program up and running,
Yeah.
that technology would be necessary where? At each school and the Department of Education, or?
Just at the Department of Education.
Just at the Department of Ed?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
All right, am I correct that we have New Hampshire Hunger Solutions people who may want to say something, or? Not necessary if
If you have questions, how about if you have questions for them? I think you're covering the hunger and the school nutrition
Yeah.
issues broadly,
Yeah.
in all of these hearings. So maybe if you have specific questions, for them, they would answer them.
Okay, great. Could we have you come up and I will ask my compatriots here whether or not they have questions for New Hampshire Hunger Solutions?
Thank you, Chairman.
Representative Ford.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for taking our questions. My question is kind of a system-wide, if you will. I hear a lot of discussion about we're interested in this aspect of it or that aspect, hunger and so forth. When I talked and surveyed the people working in the schools in my region, they basically said we follow the guidelines that we're given and the requirements on us for providing whatever it is for food in the schools, and did not have any record or much incident, apparently, of complaints about their following the prescribed meal preparation kinds of things. So I'm wondering what, from your perspective, is different maybe than they would see it. And are we looking at just sort of where they can get their food and how you can prepare it, or who has refrigeration for storing it and preparation, et cetera, all the concomitant expenses of food preparation that aren't specifically preparation, but, you know.
Yeah, so I just want to make sure that I'm understanding your question correctly, that you're just wondering, like, what is the increased nutritional value of local food versus following the guidelines and ordering from large distribution companies?
I wasn't specifically questioning that part of it. It's really just a question of how much more refrigeration do we need? How much more storage? When I was a child, we were on a pretty hard scrabble farm, but we stored all the potatoes on the ground under the house. So when you wanted potatoes, one of the kids got sent under the house to get potatoes. So that can't be happening at a school, I realize. And you have electricity. We didn't. And, our EA hadn't gotten to us yet. So it's just that question of, all right, what do you do to keep it? And unless you're keeping hogs out behind every school for all the waste, it's not getting processed very efficiently.
Yes, so there, most of the schools would be able to handle this if they would be ordering some food instead of other foods from larger companies. So it wouldn't be a need, I don't believe, as for additional storage. It would just be replacing what they're purchasing with more local food. So if they had the opportunity to purchase local potatoes that were lightly processed, they could purchase local potatoes or apples or carrots or cabbage, things that are also listed on there, like local harvest of the month. So being able to offer something along those lines on their menu with these funds, because it's not a large amount of funds that are getting distributed through this bill, but it's enough to allow schools the equitable opportunity to participate in purchasing local food for their schools. I'll just give an example. I was in a conversation when I was working with Stacy on a farm to school project with the food service director from Bedford, the food service director from Exeter, and the food service director from Nashua. And the food service director from Exeter and the food service director from Bedford had plenty of funds to be able to purchase local foods. But the food service director from Nashua, even though they're from a larger school district, did not have the same amount of funds to be able to purchase local foods. And so this bill would provide an equitable opportunity for school districts that are from lower income areas to be able to purchase local foods and participate in things like the local harvest of the month education program. So, and I will just add that a lot of the farm to school grants, the federal grants that are coming through, and as Stacy mentioned, the ARPA funds, they do help to address storage and distribution and any additional costs that may need to be incurred in order to support local food purchases. Yeah, welcome.
Representative Woodcock.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and maybe out of line, so please stop me. I missed the preceding meeting, and I don't want to waste everybody else's time, but is it possible to get like a 2-minute executive summary of New Hampshire Foods Hunger Solutions? what they do? Just catch me up.
Yeah, New Hampshire Hunger
Thank you.
Solutions is a statewide advocacy organization, and we work to improve participation in federal nutrition programs, school meals, SNAP, WIC, and the Child and Adult Care Feeding Program, which is for child care and senior care centers.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
All right, so I have just a curiosity question. I think I'm looking more for an opinion than a piece of data here. We have received loads of information from the Department of Education about the percentages of kids that qualify for free and reduced lunches. And in looking through that information prior to this meeting, it looks, according to the DOE data, like the number of kids that are eligible for free and reduced lunch is dropping over time. What I would like to know from New Hampshire Hunger Solutions is whether or not you think student hunger is dropping, or is there some sort of disconnect between the data that we have, which is only as good as the paperwork that we get, right? So is there a disconnect between the data and the reality of student hunger or not?
I think there is a disconnect between the data and actual hunger. I mean, so the most recent census pulse data tells us that 79,000 adults and households in New Hampshire said that they experienced food insecurity in the last 7 days. 370,000+ households in New Hampshire said that they had difficulty paying for usual household expenses in the last 7 days. And that's a lot of adults and households for New Hampshire having 1 million people. 370,000 is quite a bit of people having a difficulty paying their bills. With food service programs in schools specifically, if children don't make it to breakfast in the morning, because most schools serve breakfast before the bell and not after the bell, then they miss out on that opportunity to have breakfast, and they may not have had dinner the day before. And it may be embarrassing to highlight that they're hungry, or especially as the kids get older and it becomes more stigmatizing for a middle school or a high school student to participate in programs that are deemed for the poor kids. So I think that we do have an underreporting of actual hunger in schools due to stigma, due to how programs are offered, and also I would say that the pandemic factors into some of the data that we're seeing, that we have lower participation in school meals because it was harder to access them during the pandemic when families were at home and may not have been able, and parents were still working and may not have been able to make it to certain pickup times for meals.
Can I add one piece to that as well? I don't know what the data is exactly that you have in front of you, but also because the federal government made lunches free and accessible to everyone, then there was a period of time where families didn't have to sign up for meals. And so there, in a sense, is a gap in data there, but also the missing that practice of signing up every year and being out of that routine means that it's hard to get everybody who needed to sign up again then when it changed back to needing to sign up for lunches as opposed to everyone receiving them free.
Representative Ellison.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is more of a comment, and I'm not sure it's correct, so I need to be corrected. It seems to me that what I remember about food stamp participation in this state, that consistently year after year after year, 40% of the people who are eligible for food stamps do not apply for food stamps. I would suggest that's probably a factor, and you've raised that as a factor in terms of people applying for eligibility for free or reduced price lunch as well.
Yeah, we do have low SNAP participation and enrollment in our state. We miss about 60% of our population over the age of 60 who are eligible but not enrolled. And we do miss about 17,000 children in households who are eligible for SNAP but not enrolled. And one of the things that can help that is when we just had passed in the last legislative session a SNAP outreach program. So our state has applied for a SNAP outreach program through the federal government. We have a subcontractor that will be announced eventually once the plan is approved, and we'll hopefully see more enrollments in the food stamp or SNAP program. And when families are eligible for SNAP, they're directly certified for school meals, which can save a lot of paperwork and the burden for families. I can speak for myself. When the packet comes in, it takes at least an hour to sit down and fill out all the paperwork that's required. And then the school meals document is sometimes included in that registration packet, but maybe not always as prominent. So I think it's an issue for families to know that if they fill it out, it not only helps their family with free and reduced meals, but it also helps with other education funding that can help their school. And so changing the message a little bit for people to say like they're helping their school district by applying and participating is important. And it's one of the reasons why Medicaid direct certification is also on our agenda of things to talk about, because we know that will help to enroll more families without the burden of paperwork or the stigma of identifying themselves as being in need.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Representative Ford.
Thank you, Madam Chair. A follow-up question on that process of funding things. When we started this process, I requested some help from UNH contacts about data that was available. And what they sent us was an international study. And the detail that leaps out to me that they concluded was, don't stop with breakfast. A breakfast-only program does not resolve the child hunger problem. Schools should offer meals throughout the day, or at least at lunch too. Is that something you would agree with as a conclusion?
Yeah, I think you have to have, breakfast and lunch served at schools, and in some districts, a family dinner would be even helpful, and that can be attained through the CACFP program. But just to go back to breakfast, New Hampshire is 47th in the country for school breakfast participation. We miss about 7,800 students a day who are eligible to participate but do not participate in school breakfast, and we leave about $1.5 million federal dollars on the table because of it. So we try to change our terminology to school meal programs because it's more than just lunch and it's more than just breakfast. It's breakfast and lunch. And we know that those may be the only 2 meals a day that a child has access to.
Yeah. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Representative Woodcock.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And this may not be the correct time, but since it brought it up, so I'm going to take advantage of that. We received, through the good work of Jennifer Ford, some information, a chart on different costs of things. And one of the costs that I don't see here, you may have it from the federal, we were talking about the federal participation last time where it's open to all last year, right? Okay.
Sorry.
You can have some too. Okay.
Interrupt.
Thank you. Anyhow, so my question is there a reasonable or a close or something possible of a guesstimation or a good estimation of what it would cost if we addressed the nutritional needs as the federal government did for all students for breakfast and lunch? What would the annual cost be for the state? I understand that we would still receive federal reimbursement funds proportionally, but so I was thinking maybe we had that data from because of the last year with the when the federal government actually did that. I mean, that's a figure I really like to pursue because I think that's the avenue we need to pursue. Did I screw up the question? Did you miss it?
No, I think that I would have to refer to the Department of Education for that number, and we'd have to do a deeper analysis of the data to have that exact number.
But is that number available somewhere?
It can be. It's not, I don't, unless I'll refer to Department of Education if they have that number, but I think that number would have to be calculated.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair.
Representative Woodcock, just as a clarification, so you're talking about the Meals for Everybody program that took place during the
Similar to
pandemic.
Exactly, Madam Chair. Similar to what the federal government did during COVID.
Right.
Obviously, we saw the participation rate be huge because everyone could have it.
Yeah.
The stigma was taken away because everyone had it.
Yeah.
And the food service knew how much money they were going to get, and it was very. The question is, if we have such a low participation in our breakfast program, it starts the day for youngsters, and we have kids who aren't taking the lunch program because they may not be able to sign up in embarrassed, and we know educationally that's what they need, and we have the opportunity to do it. I just wondering why we aren't looking at a more inclusive bill that says this is what we need to do, this is what it's cost, is it worth the investment?
Yeah, just for, my point of clarification with you was not justifying feeding kids. My point of clarification was that there's a certain responsibility of the federal government to participate in the school meals program. So what you're looking for is what would it cost the state of New Hampshire
Yes.
if we were to be able,
Exactly.
if we instituted that program?
Yeah, and understanding the federal, yes, you're correct, Madam Chair, and understanding that the federal government is going to do their portion of reimbursement as they normally would for free and reduced lunch.
Okay.
I just want to know what our cost would be for the state so we could know what the best we could do for our youngsters.
Just making sure you weren't trying to live free by separating us from the federal dollars and taking on our own independent lunch program. Thank you,
No,
Representative
thank you.
Woodcock.
So, I'm sorry, could I just respond to that? I would say that there are a lot of opportunities if we can put all of the right pieces into place as far as Medicaid direct certification would identify more students that would be eligible for free and reduced meals. That direct certification process would mean that more schools would be eligible for something they call the community eligibility provision, which if a school participates in that, can offer free meals to all of their students and get reimbursed for a certain percentage of their students based on, there's a lot of formulas, so not getting into the weeds of it too much, but they can be reimbursed by the federal government for feeding more students. And then that usually will bring in more income for food service programs. The problem is if it's a large school district or a school district that has a lot of schools, it's really hard to implement. And that's why we only, out of 13 schools who are eligible for this program right now in New Hampshire, we only have 3 that participate in it. So we would need things in place like more SNAP enrollment or Medicaid direct certification in order to identify more students who are eligible to offer free meals to more school districts with the federal reimbursement and taking the pressure off the state for that reimbursement.
Thank you.
You're
Thanks, Madam
welcome.
Chair.
Representative Lakis.
I'm curious, do you know why we have such little participation for breakfast when it's available?
What we're understanding is that if breakfast is offered before the bell and not after the bell, then students have to get to school early to be able to go in and participate. It's often stigmatized as that is, when you're getting in older grades, that breakfast is for the kids who don't have money. It also, if you're thinking about younger students, it's a social time for them before they go into the classroom. So if their friends are outside hanging out on the playground playing, they're less likely to go in and have that breakfast. So what we find, the evidence-based, is that if you offer breakfast after the bell, for younger kids that's in the classroom or grab and go for them to take back to the classroom. For middle school and high school students, it's a second chance breakfast or a grab and go. Second chance means that during their morning break period, they can go back to the cafeteria and have breakfast again. Those are evidence-based models used throughout the country. And when those have been implemented, we've seen huge increases in participation. We did this model in one school in Dover and saw a 40% increase in breakfast participation when we offered breakfast after the bell. And we only piloted it in 4th grade, but saw an increase throughout the school because kids were talking about it and breakfast was cool. So
Follow-up.
So why don't we do that?
Because it takes a lot of systems change within just a school district to make it happen. There has to be, there's quite a few stakeholders in the decision-making process. And so part of our job at New Hampshire Hunger Solutions is to work with school districts to find ways to make it happen. But it also means getting the custodial staff involved, teachers involved, principals, the superintendents, school nurses, parents, and students. And it's been a little bit of a challenge during the pandemic to have all those players at the table when there's a lot of staffing issues and other stressors going on. But we do see promise, and we actually just hired a child nutrition director who's with us here today that'll be helping to support that work around the state.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Representative Ellison.
Thank you for taking my question. Thank you, Madam Chair. I simply want to second what Steve has said, and I understand the complications at the local school district level in terms of implementing a new set of guidelines or revised guidelines and how everyone's going to work together. I'm somewhat involved in the Medicaid certification thing. I think those of us on this committee want to know how much is it going to cost to make sure that every single kid in school in New Hampshire gets breakfast and gets lunch. So I understand the variables, and we're if, but we want to know what that number is or what that number should be. That would be helpful to us. And I understand there's a series of guesses that go into that, but I would like it to be that specific. Thank you.
Representative Woodcock.
Just a follow-up comment to Representative Lucas's question about why don't we do it. One of the reasons we don't do it is last year a bill to provide the 30 schools that don't provide breakfast was voted down. That's why one of the reasons we don't do it.
Additional questions? All right. Thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Thank you.
Thank you all very much.
Are you Representative Simpson? You don't have anybody?
No, that's all for us.
Okay. All right. Great. Thank you very much. All right. In our audience, are there any speakers that we have not heard from yet that would like to address this issue? Excellent. Thank you very much for your participation this morning. All right. So committee members. Question? Oh, I know you're always really here, Representative Cornell, though I understand that you're here as a guest at this point. All right, so committee members, I want to refresh your memories that during the first week of August, I sent you a document that was created by Jennifer Four that answered a number of questions that we had generated at the meeting prior to this one. I don't know that everyone has had a chance to look at it and digest it, but I want to call your attention to it because if we don't discuss this today, then we will be discussing it at our next meeting. It is basically a body of knowledge that she was able to pull together regarding states that have similar demographics to New Hampshire and what kinds of things they have implemented or found to be helpful in addressing student hunger in those states. So, comment, first of all, were you able to receive and open the document? Yes? Okay. I was going to say, Representative Leckis, you're not good at hiding your emotions on your face. I can see that you received the document. Would you like additional time to go through that document before we discuss it, I guess is my...
I skimmed it. I did not fully read it. No.
Okay. Representative Ford, you received the document. Okay. All right. Representatives Woodcock and Hall, you did receive the document?
Receive, review, and don't have it with me, but I'd like to discuss it when we have the whole committee has read it.
Okay, the whole committee as in the full,
No, the whole subcommittee.
oh, yeah,
So we're all on the same, we're all the same base of information for the dialogue.
yeah, okay. All right, so then it looks to me like I'll be giving you a homework assignment, which is basically to review this document that came in, as I said, the first week of July from me. So if you need to go hunt it down again, it'll be under my name. It has position and summary statements from a variety of states, Delaware, Maine, Vermont, and it also goes through the financials of what happened in the state of Maine, because that has a lot of not only demographic similarities to New Hampshire, but also population-wise, weather-wise, and the boilerplate language for any of the legislation that they passed is in that document. So if you do have trouble, just when you look at it, you'll see that Jennifer Four's memo and summary is first, but then there are additional documents that you're going to want to take a look at. Also, Representatives Murray and Simpson, if you would like to look at those documents, I'll be happy to forward them to you as well. Yeah, just because we don't need to reinvent the wheel when the wheel is in the middle of the room. All right, great. Yeah, okay. Anybody, really seriously, anybody that would like to see those documents, I'm happy to provide them if you want to. Representative Tanner, can I put you in charge of putting a piece of paper on the end of that table that collects email addresses of anybody that would like a copy of this? That's the easiest way to do it, I think. All right, comments, questions from the committee. We have another committee meeting in 25 minutes, so we do have time to discuss anything that you would like to raise at this point. Representative Woodcock.
Thank you, Representative. Just, can you give me your overview of a timeline or where you think we're going or what where was our closure point and implement that type of wrap, if you could?
You mean, are we ever going to stop talking about student hunger in New Hampshire? No, Representative Woodcock, we're not. My timeline is this. I would like to call our next meeting for somewhere around October 4, 5, 6, somewhere in there. Our report on this committee is due on the 28th, and Representative Ladd has let it be known that we will be having a full education meeting, I believe, somewhere towards the latter part of October to look at all the interim study recommendations. So if any of you have a problem with 4, 5, 6, 7, that week prior to Columbus Day, let me know, but otherwise I'll be asking Representative Ladd to coordinate with me so that we don't duplicate efforts again and schedule ourselves. We had you guys scheduled in 2 places at the same time, so we'll try to avoid that moving forward. I see that, Representative Woodcock, as our last meeting. So yeah, so during that meeting, we will consider the research from Jennifer Four. We can look back and discuss any of the information that we gathered from New Hampshire Hunger Solutions, School to Farm, the DOE, any concerns that or questions anybody has. And then at that point, what we will be doing, this is, when you're the chair of the study to have a study, it's an interesting motion that needs to be made, I guess. We'll have to make a motion to either recommend or not recommend further legislation. But we will not be recommending specific legislation. In other words, you don't have to have an LSR in front of you to propose. What we'll be deciding as a committee is whether or not we think the issue warrants additional legislation. Yes, sir.
Just finally, I won't bother you again on this issue. Is it possible for you to be sure to ascertain that number that Representative Ellis and I were looking for in terms of the,
I will do so. In fact, when I sprinted in here this morning, the first person I spoke to was Jennifer Four, because I said to her, look, I'm telling you right now, I handed Steve Woodcock this piece of paper and he asked me 3 questions right off the top of his head. So she has said, and also the DOE will, I'm sure that,
so we have the next, that we're on it.
yeah, I will do my best
thank you.
to get that information.
Thank you.
All right, additional comments, questions? All right, then I am going to adjourn this meeting. We have another meeting in this room at 10:30 and I'll be back in my old seat. So looking forward to it. Thanks, everybody, for coming.
Okay. Okay, I'd like to go ahead and open up this subcommittee for HB 1680. This is a bill that deals with funding of education here in the state of New Hampshire. And we will, what I'd like to do today is that due to the nature of this bill and the complexity of this bill, I'd like to have Representative Luno, if he would please, just give us from the very top a brief synopsis of some of the critical components that this legislation would provide. And because I feel that, you know, we're looking at the need for addressing this issue of funding of education in the state of New Hampshire. We've been dealing with this ever since I've been in the House here. And I'm going on, this will be my 15th, 16th year coming up. And it's been a topic of a discussion that just seems like, you know, Groundhog Day. It just comes and goes around and around and around, and yet we are still hassling out with some of those major issues and components that this legislation is trying to address. There are some points within it that I think everybody can come up and say, well, I don't necessarily agree with that, but I like to try to get away from that perspective and find out what do we really have to do to address some of the issues which we have here in terms of funding of education in the state. So with that, I'd like to have Dave, if you would please give a brief overview of this legislation to get everybody up to snuff.
No, be pleased to do that. Actually, I was wondering if I could, if Mel could maybe say a few words, just.
That would be fine. And that's what I'd like to have brief, because I had about an hour and a half session on Friday with Bill Ardinger, and it started out being only like a 40-minute meeting, and it went and went and went. We were at the trustee meeting together over at UNH Manchester, so. Try to give the overview succinctly, if you would. I don't mind who wants to do it.
No, well, Mel's going to talk a little bit about some of it, and then I'll sort of lay out the problems that this bill goes after.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think the issue here, as you said, that school funding has been on the docket here in the legislature for a number of years. And the dilemma that we have is, how do we get a comprehensive look at this? In the past, excuse me, in the past, we basically have tinkered with the formula. We've tinkered with the concepts around it. And more recently, we had in 2008, Governor Shaheen had a major committee that looked at this issue. And again, they tinkered around with it. In 2018, Representative Umberger housed a committee of which both myself and you were on it, as well as Glenn Cordelli was on it. And again, we tinkered with it around the issues around it. We've never really looked at the core basis of how do we provide equity around funding. And I think that prompted me to then introduce the bill that created the commission. And the commission basically was, its charge was to take a deep dive. We hadn't taken a deep dive at this really until since the middle 80s, when we had Augenblick came in, a consultant came in and looked at it and made some recommendations. Those recommendations were not followed by the House or by the legislature. And so you come up with Claremont 1, Claremont 2, Londonderry, Dover, etc. And each time we've not really done the deep dive. This commission did that work. We worked, started right in March, right when the COVID hit in. So we had a lot of Zoom calls. We spent a year looking at this in 2020 and made recommendations. I think it's important to note too that when the original formula was created, we basically did one thing. We looked at the input part of what it costs. The input section deals basically with, well, what's the average teacher salary? What's the benefit packages? How many desks are in a room? How many administrators? It dealt with things. At the time that the concept was created, we had no data, no metrics that dealt with student performance. And so what the commission really tried to look at was not only look at the issue of the input model, which we currently have, but what might be another model that would be able to track student performance. And this is a whole new concept for us. And so that's what we looked at. David was the chair of this, and I'm going to turn it over to Dave and let him basically look at the recommendations that came out of that commission. Thanks.
Thanks, Mel. Yeah, and I think what Mel's also talking about is the fact that we were fortunate, I think, in 2020 for the School Funding Commission to have 10 years worth of data collected by the department, where we could actually evaluate everything from school district budgets to student outcomes in every district to how money was being spent or budgeted in every district, and through a group of consultants that are really experts in education funding and experts in economics. They were able to evaluate that, and some facts dropped out, some results dropped out of that I think probably were not, are not, mysterious to anybody. But in school districts that have higher incidents of poverty, student outcomes were significantly lower, and at the same time, student outcomes were also tended to be lower in school districts that had limited access to financial resources, meaning that their property valuations were much lower than state average. And there are combinations of there are districts where they don't have both of those two factors, but those two factors were certainly drove a drop in student outcomes, lack of access to funding, and high instances of poverty. So although New Hampshire overall has very strong student outcomes, top 5 in the country, we're not seeing that universally across, and not even close to that across school districts. So what House Bill 1680 does is basically responds to the information that the School Funding Commission learned, and develops proposes to a model for costing what it would cost for a school district to educate its students to a statewide outcome based on the student and district characteristics. How to go about funding that every school district's budget based on their access to local resources, and then the state coming in and making sure that they can get all the way, and an accountability section that looks at student outcomes. And the important linkage here, in fact, more than half, I think probably close to half of the 26-page bill, something like that, is actually the accountability section. And that accountability section is based on student outcomes. And the importance of this, and I guess the rationale behind this, is that the costing and the funding is also based on student outcomes. So there's actually a rational connection between how students are doing and how we go about costing and funding our local school districts. There's a third section to the to House Bill 1680, which is actually a bill that was just had an interim study work session in the Ways and Means Committee, and it's called House Bill 504. So that's contained in the last part of House Bill 1680. And it looks at a couple of things that I think are also relevant to school funding. That certainly a significant portion of the $1 billion that the state of New Hampshire spends on public school district school districts comes from the state property tax, the SWEP, statewide education property tax. And so the SWEP currently incorporates a blanket tax rebate mechanism based on where you live. So if you're in a property wealthy district, then essentially you get a rebate and an excess grant back from the state. Currently, that's in the $35 million, $40 million range, and what that results in is certainly is property tax relief for people that live in those communities. But it also results in an effective lower tax rate for the state property tax, which is on its face blatantly unconstitutional. So House Bill 504, and through its incorporation in 1680, goes about correcting that so that the state property tax will be collected the same way any other state taxes, in this case, be collected locally and then remitted to the state. And the second part is the intent of property tax relief should really be directed to low and moderate income homeowners, and not be based on solely where you live, regardless of household income. So it recognizes the importance of a property tax relief mechanism, and incorporates that, actually builds out our current low and moderate income property tax relief with additional funds and higher levels, so that the benefits would be closer to, I think, $1,000 off property taxes, which for a lot of low and moderate income families across the state would be very meaningful. So we're hoping today that just like Chair Ladd said, that while the mechanisms in 1680 may not be exactly what everybody wants, and certainly I think require substantial additional debate, that the problems that 1680 is directed to, that being student and taxpayer fairness, that being accountability that's tied to funding based on costing and funding based on outcomes, that districts across the state don't need a one-size-fits-all funding plan, but something that's reflective of the challenges and the differences in each school district, and then important changes to the state property tax and property tax relief program. At the end of the day, it's a plan that gets phased in over a 10-year period, so it's not a drop it all in the first year. It has a transition plan for local property taxes that phases out over a period of 5 years, and that would rely on COVID money to do that. So I think we've got a sort of a once in a generation, maybe once in a lifetime opportunity to take advantage of available funds for that, and that it's worthy of further discussion in the next session. So I'm hoping this committee will find it and recommend it for future legislation, just as the House Ways and Means Committee just did unanimously with the state property tax for education portion of it. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Dave and Mel. Are there any questions from the subcommittee to either Representative Luno or Representative Myler, who just spoke, reference the high $30,000 view or purpose? Okay, I'd like to move on. You did mention one area, and there's a lot to be discussed here. Obviously, accountability and student outcomes is something we want to get into. However, I understand that there was recently a letter written by the state Senate here to the governor addressing the issue of SWEP. I've not seen that letter, and Senator...
Not swept. I think this was on the direct... direct certification.
Oh, Medicaid, sir. Okay, so that clarifies that one for me. Good. Yeah, we need to have that.
Yeah, Jay, do you have a
move
copy
forward.
of that with you?
Do you have a copy of that, Senator?
Okay.
Yeah. Now, we're running out of time here
And that was.
on that.
And that was unanimous, all 23 senators?
That was the intent.
Okay.
It was coming in a bipartisan manner. It was trying to review the question that we had during our legislative session about participating in the pilot
USDA, yeah.
that the Department of Agriculture was doing for qualifying school lunch membership.
Yeah.
School meals.
Yeah, if we can get a hold of that letter, that would certainly be appreciated. Certainly that's something that we espouse too. The more, right now, through the free and reduced program, we're not getting all these students that are eligible signing up. As we know in the high school, there's big drop off. And that affects everything we do from adequacy to career tech, which we've talked about in the past, and the funding from the federal government. We're missing out on huge dollars.
Rick, just to quantify that, the FY20 free and reduced, and this is the state grant, adequacy grant, $86 million. FY22, it goes down to $64 million.
Yeah. That's a whole topic in itself in terms of how schools are handling that with Meals for Kids, or not providing. And it also then it's a direct relationship to how we're doing everything in the adequacy there and the funding that's coming to us, and it even ends up impacting property taxes. Yes, you had a question.
I did, Mr. Chair.
Representative Porter.
It seems, please, my mind is not in legislative mode, okay, I have to admit that. But didn't we have a proposal that came before the House and was defeated for that Medicaid usage? Did that happen, or am
We
I?
did, and that was, how one read that bill was how it was interpreted, whether in fact we were giving DOE the authority to go ahead and implement, or whether we're giving them the authority to go and research and see what it would take to become a member of that program with the USDA. But I understand the pilot program itself is coming to a real close here within a month.
The application.
Yeah, the application period. And that's a significant issue that we need to address.
But do we have time? I mean, if the House has defeated that, I guess I'm just confused where it is in the process. Is this two different processes?
The House, two different things. Our current funding mechanism is obviously it's important because it's what's in place right now, and it relies heavily on the I think student applications or family applications for their students to apply for free and reduced lunch program. And so that's used for two things. It's used for the students to get free and reduced price lunch, but it's also used in the calculation of the adequacy grant, which has dropped by $20 million just because of a change in the free and reduced lunch participation.
But the question that I had was more getting into this pilot program. If we brought that up to the House in a bill, which we did, you said, Mr. Chair, and it was interpreted in a different way and defeated, do we have time? Do we need the legislature's approval to get into that pilot program? And have we already denied that?
The department can do that.
The department can do it without us?
Correct.
Okay, thank you very much. That was my question.
It's my understanding that the department can make application.
Okay.
To whether we get involved in that program is a different issue. From the state perspective, the department, they can make the application and get all that information, but for us then to get engaged in that is there's confidentiality issues associated with Medicaid and all that, which need to be looked at. But it's very important, if we don't go that route, then how do we get a hold of some of the revenues which we need to get a hold of? And it's concerning me as a school principal years ago. I used to, when I had a family come in and request and be eligible for free or reduced meals, and the elementary children brought it in, and the middle school kids sort of brought it in, and the high school kids blew it off, we were not gaining revenue for all those kids. And the principal has the option, superintendent, of making some exceptions and saying, I'm going to approve this knowing that this circumstance exists. And I would encourage our administration out there in the field that if you get it in from a family, it should be good for all in that family. And I don't know if we're necessarily doing that in all our districts. Representative Lekes.
There's a problem with your assumption that we can apply and then decide whether or not to do it. I actually had in my possession the application form, and it specifically says that if you apply, you are guaranteeing that your state will participate. So we have to know that we are absolutely going to participate and share all that information, which is confidential. And that information has to be shared as part of the application, or we have to decide we're not going to, but we can't apply and then decide whether or not to do it, because we are actually in the application is signing that, yes, absolutely, we are going to do this program.
Thank you. So that's part of the issue, and that's why we are where we are right now, unfortunately. So let's get back to this particular bill here, 1680. And if we could get a hold of that letter J, I'd appreciate it. The 1680 has a number of components within it. And I'd like to start off with just a brief discussion on one of those components, if we may, on the formula that's, and I'd like to see where we stand as a committee, just sort of as informational, on the weighted components of special education under differentiated aid. As you recall, in that bill, there was a weighted component. If you were eligible for special education, I think it was 4 point something times the 4.9 or 4.6, I don't have it in front of me, times the base adequacy amount. We then passed an amendment last year. Remember, we were talking about I think it was Senate Bill 420, I believe, was the Education Extraordinary Needs Grant. We added an amendment in which added another $15 million for two categories of special education aid, where we took the 13 IEPs, and there were 3 IEPs we felt that could be provided at the cost that we presently have. That was right around $2,000 in differentiated aid for special education, and the other 10 categories were basically doubled. And that increased the amount that would come through aid to schools by the amount of $15 million for the total. It wasn't a significant hunk of money, but that was rejected and passed out of our committee unanimously, went out of the House, and got killed in Finance, Division 2. I thought, well, we brought it up in committee conference, but that didn't make it. It was basically said, the letter that I got back from the chair of Division 2, now the chair of Finance, was, this is a great idea, pursue it in next session. Well, the next session's upon us. And so that's just one of the components, one of the weighted categories within that. And I'm trying to say, are we all still there saying that's a good idea to be weighting out different categories? I'm not saying that formula is correct. I'm just saying now the concept of doing that. Yes, Representative Luno.
Yeah, Rick, thanks. I support, obviously, we all supported it, I believe, when it came through this committee, when your amendment came through the committee. And I would certainly support it in a funding, as part of a costing formula as well. As long as we're able to get those, those ADMs from the department. I think that was something that we'd had some challenges with early on in breaking down to the 13 different categories.
Yeah, I'm gonna pass out that paperwork so everybody's
but I think
trying to recall.
But I think your plan to blend those into 2 categories. If that puts the department into an easier position where they can provide that ADM information, I think that makes a lot of sense.
And I've talked to DOE, and Rebecca Fredette could not be here today due that she's out of Concord. But the three categories which we have, you'll see there in category A were developmental delays, specific learning disabilities, speech and language impairments. And then everything from autism through multiple disabilities to other health impairments was in that second category. I don't think necessarily we need to be looking that specifically what goes in which category. I think we need to work with our department and trying to ascertain which categories within the special ed differentiated aid require a lot more attention from a staff member in a school, and the costs, of course, increase. There is some data that I've gathered, national data, where that has been done, and I've seen it. I'll make copies for everybody on the committee so you can see it, because we're not going to resolve everything here today, and we'll get that to you. But I think, as you're saying, it's a component within any formula. Even if we stayed with a current formula, we need to modify this area, I believe, in special education to more appropriately fund it. This would not fund it to where it needs to be funded. Remember, the feds are guaranteed at 40% funding from the national level, which has never occurred. Now we're down close to 16, 17% coming down. And so that's another thing we're passing on, kind of like this mandate to the property taxpayer, and there's no way to avoid that from happening, seeing IDEA is here, and we can't afford to lose all the other money. Linda.
Does this, thank you, does this, as far as my understanding of special education, there's a pool of money for special education, and depending on what the different schools apply for that special education, then it's determined what percentage of their application is actually funded. Is my understanding of that correct?
There's two pots of money. We're talking about the adequacy money.
Okay, this is not
the money which is obligated to every student that's eligible in this state. Okay. So whether you're donor or non-donor town, this is what you get. Then you have what we call special education aid, now catastrophic aid is what they used to be called. So when you get to 3.5 times the average cost of a student in the state, say the cost is 20 grand to educate a student in a state. So you go 3 times that, it'd be $60,000, half of the 20 another. So it'd be $70,000 you have to spend locally prior to you receiving any state support at all. Then the next component, up to 10 times that average amount, the state kicks in a percentage of that, which is, I believe, 80%. So, and then from 10 on, you're getting support from the state for 100% of those kids. It means that the local district's paying a huge hunk of money in special education. I was speaking to a superintendent just the other day, which they had a student now that's up to the level, believe it or not, over $400,000 a year. It's a small district. They don't have a backup reserve or trust fund to support that. And that is where they hit the wall. Yes.
As a follow-up on that, isn't there a set pool of money, though, so for that catastrophic aid that it seemed like they, even though they apply for, they reach the 70,000 and they apply for it, because it's then spread out amongst everybody in the state that applies for that same money out of a pool of money, so it kind of is capped. They only get a portion of that back. Is that
There's two answers that we did pass legislation where districts can get together and pool into providing a source of revenue that they contribute each year so much. It's like an insurance plan. The other idea that we have there, we do have some emergency money available through the state for these types of students, but it's very, very little. And it's basically something which the school districts can't count on. The catastrophic aid is based upon that formula, and that's what you as a district have to front for you must.
Prior, because you get it for the prior year.
Yes, and it's for the prior year. Yeah.
Just like our.
Just like the adequacy formula.
So I'm hearing from some schools that, you know, essentially they're getting like a 20% on the special ed costs that they have, or 30%, because there's a limited pot of money at the state level for special education.
That's that very small pot of money I spoke about. And that's just based upon where they are towards the end of the year. They can prorate it out to school districts, but that is not, it's
minimal.
marginal.
Yeah, thank you.
Other questions on the special ed? So is, in terms of having this weighted formula within any component of funding, we're still on board with this concept? That's good. Good. So we'll move forward with that. Dave, do you have anybody here that they coming and speaking on behalf of the bill?
Thanks, Rick. I didn't really plan any particular testimony on this, seeing as this is a work session. But again, I think a lot of the bills that we're talking about here, well, certainly 1680 and I think House Bill 504 are really directed at problems that I think, and I don't think it's a partisan issue, but I think problems that people have identified in certain areas, whether that's state property tax, whether that's school funding. I think there's people on all sides of the aisle that recognize that, yeah, we got issues in these areas. And I think there's probably some people here that can speak to that. One thing that we haven't talked about this morning, which I think is also indicative that there's problems in this area, are that there's a couple of court cases, one that's been filed, I think, over 2 years, and one that's been recently filed. And Zach Sheehan is here and may be able to give a high-level overview of what those cases are about and the problems that they've identified.
Yeah, we can address. I'd rather not get into Conval and the Valinsky issue just yet. Today we can, but I'd like to address some of the specific issues within the bill, like accountability. Accountability is something which I believe that we really don't have a strong accountability plan for differentiated aid right now. I went through last night and I was looking at the pupil-teacher ratios in all our districts, and the average around 17-1. And then I also looked at achievement scores of kids within the districts. And it's a mixed thing where you can have very, very low pupil-teacher ratio, and you still have a high percentage of your students that are in levels 1 and 2. Those are the areas on the assessment which are not performing. And I know that's true. I'm looking at Representative Woodcock over there, and that's true in Conway. Very much true in Conway, where you have a very high percentage over there. It's close to 70% that are really not faring well. Yet Conway does have some kind of a property tax base. So the accountability issue to me comes, at what point does the state have the authority to come in and say to local school, you're not cutting it, here's what you're going to have to do? Representative Porter.
So I keep thinking back to some research that was done back when I was teaching in public schools. So that's 20 some odd years now since I've been there, believe it or not. And it seems to be holding true from what I've read since then, that the number one predictor of how kids do on these tests is the education level and the income level of the parents. So I'm wondering so I just want to throw that out there, which might have something to do with what's happening in Conway, that there's a lot of money there, but not necessarily in the homes of the children that are being educated there. So just want to throw that out as a thought. So communities like Hopkinton, for example, that has one of the best school districts in the state, they have a lot of people in their community that are professionals and have high incomes. And a community like mine, which is kind of blue collar, we have some, we're improving all the way, but we don't have as many professionals, high-income people in my community. So they seem to, so what I'm looking for, anecdotally, it seems to still be accurate. So I'm just throwing that out there, how we can address that issue when we're addressing the funding, and how we can help those kids that need it the most, where we can put our funding to help those kids that need it the most.
Representative Cordelli?
Yeah, I was just wondering if we could take a look at the accountability section. I know that, oh, sorry. Thank you. Back in practice. You'd mentioned a significant portion of the legislation was in accountability. Could we take a look at the accountability sections? Because, you know, there I think are opportunities there for committee agreement on a number of aspects of that.
Sure, I actually don't have that section in front of me.
How many people don't have the bill in front of you right now? So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Jen, is it possible that we could get, you know, a good 20 of those down here? The audience may want it as well.
Here.
Yeah. You know, what you said, Representative Porter, regarding that is absolutely true. You look at a town like a Hanover, and when I looked at those students in Hanover, which were in the first or second quartile, 17%. Then when I look at Rochester and some of the others, it's it's big. Yes. Yes.
Hey, I'm sorry, go ahead, Linda.
So I just want to caution this teacher to pupil ratio, how if you just take the number of students in a school and divide it by the number of teachers and come out to the average, that it isn't at all a clear view of what happens in a school. There are some students in special ed, for example, who have a teacher for just 2 pupils, or there may be advanced placement courses taught where there is 1 teacher for maybe 10 students, and yet there may be a art, music, or phys ed teacher who has 30 students in their class. So it really isn't reflective. People think that they're going to walk into school and see 1 teacher with 17 kids in the class. That's not going to happen.
And I concur with you. And you know, that's one of the areas we don't want to get caught up in, that by funding districts more money will just increase maybe that aspect of, you know, to lower our pupil teacher ratio. Yes, that may be good, but it may be also wise not to necessarily put the money there. It may be wise to put it in how much you're paying the teachers that you have. You know, right now there's a teacher shortage, and we have another committee looking at that right now, and we're really shallow on the sciences and the maths, on the special education. How are we going to get more people in? And we're seeing the pipeline out of the university level and the college level are not delivering the numbers that they need to deliver to us. So why are we having so few students going in that direction saying, I'm not going to be a teacher? Well, maybe it's because it's hard to live on $40,000 a year or $35,000 a year versus as a person working where I was on a oil platform out in the Ketchikan Sea getting $150,000. Yeah, big difference. Yeah, Representative Myler.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. One of the things that we did discover in our commission work as it relates to effectiveness of education is the attrition rate of teachers. There's no question that the magic in a classroom takes place with a creative teacher that can work on a sustained basis. And when you have teachers that move in and out of a district, it interrupts the continuity of the curriculum, as well as administrators. I mean, there's no question in my mind that a pivotal person is that principal that provides the energy, that provides the vision, that provides the leadership, if you may, around the curriculum. But if in fact you have, and I'll just take Pittsfield as an example, I mean, John Freeman, the former superintendent, has been in here several times talking about this. That if Pittsfield becomes the farm team for Concord, and you have teachers that are in there for maybe 2 or 3 years, and then they move to a place where they can get like $10,000 more, it disenfranchises that curriculum where you don't have consistency. So one of the things that I'm concerned about, as well as what we're looking at in the teacher shortage issue, is how do you retain staff that knows those students that they're working with, that knows the curriculum that's there, that there's a continuance of continuity of presence of staff that knows those kids and knows that curriculum. So above and beyond just the fiscal aspect of schools, how do we keep teachers in those buildings that know those kids? And that, I think, is a huge problem. And that does get back to the issue of costing again. I hate to come back to funding of it, but it does. If you have a school district that is $10,000 below a neighboring school district, and I'm a young teacher that has loans I've got to pay off, and a young family that maybe I want to think about buying a house, the issue of funding does become a critical issue. So there's got to be a balance between the funding issue and the continuity of staff. And I want to emphasize, I'm not just talking about teachers, I'm talking about superintendents. At one point in time, Rick, you recall, several years back, we looked at Claremont, and I think Claremont had 5 superintendents in 6 different years. Well, how does that impact the staff as it relates to their leadership within the school district? So
it is a funding issue, I agree, but it's unique to individual communities. You may be living in a municipality where you can't keep your local police on board because they're going down the river 40 miles and getting a job that's going to add another 20 grand onto their annual salary. That's happening where I am in Haverhill. They go to Hanover, Lebanon. And it's true in not just education, but everything else we have going on with the municipal government. And so then it comes down to, the funding that we have in our formula, but are we going to be able to pick all that, or will we have that difference occurring in our state just by the natural way we are? Representative Woodcock, and then.
Thank you, Representative Lott. I appreciate the opportunity. 2 points. Anecdotally, as Representative Porter indicated, prior to SATs being used as the standard measure, when they were used for college admissions as the initial document, that demographic of 2-parent educated income was right on for, you could guarantee on the scores. On the bigger picture that Representative Miley is talking about, attrition, in Conway, that's a terrific measure, because the 2 schools down where Representative Cordelli lives, down in that area with Prospect Mountain and what's the other one, Glenn? Kingswood. Thank you. They're about $15,000 to start higher than Conway. And young teachers, they don't have loyalty to the community yet because they just got there. And so they realize after 2 or 3 years, they're starting to fill the toolbox, they're starting to fill the thing, and they move down to Wolfboro area, Waltonboro area, for that reason, because they don't care where they start. Figure that out over the lifetime. So, and that is a big deal, because we're training and losing, so that the people coming in have new teachers. We almost everyone around this table has been in the classroom and know it takes a while for a new teacher to start to fill that toolbox. And how do you get that youngster on board with a math class? So it is that attrition issue is a huge issue in student learning, and the retention attrition is student learning is critical. And that's the key. If you don't have it in the classroom, it doesn't matter how much you fund it. Thank you, Representative Lott.
Mm-hmm. Further comments? Representative Luna, and then Representative Nelson.
No, thanks very much, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I mean, I think and I know you want to move this towards a discussion on accountability, but I think it's important to recognize right up front that what House Bill 1680 is proposing, it is a comprehensive change to what we call school funding, but it's also a comprehensive change to the definition of an adequate education. And our current statute says an adequate education is 50 desks in a classroom and one principal for every 500 students and one librarian for every 500 students and a couple of buses and stuff like that. And what 1680 does is changes that and says an adequate education offers the opportunity for students to perform at a statewide outcome level. So that's average statewide outcome. And on a national basis, a very strong outcome. And by setting that standard and then defining what a district budget would be so that their students could perform at a statewide level. And that's going to be different for every district in the state, and the bill goes into that based on student and district characteristics. And then making sure that every school district has access to the resources they need to do that through what has historically been and what would continue to be in this bill, a partnership between local property taxpayers and the state. So we're not telling local property taxpayers that they're off the hook or anything like that, or not responsible for education, but making sure that they don't have to be taxed at an unreasonable rate, like so many communities, so many school districts are having to tax out right now. So the state makes sure that every school district has access to the resources they need after a reasonable local tax effort to meet that budget based on the cost for the school district, for the students to have to perform at a statewide outcome. And then that ties directly in to the accountability portion, which starts on page 10 of a 20-page bill. And this is really important because it really does provide the feedback mechanism for budgets, and then school operations, and then an accountability that's based on what that budget, how that budget was designed. So I think it goes to a lot of the points that are being made around here. Are you paying teachers enough? Do you have enough teachers? Do you have too many teachers? Are you offering the right mix of program, or do you need a different mix of program, or do you need different leadership in a district? And after a number of years, and that's laid out in the accountability section, you can measure how the students are doing. Are they starting to approach a statewide outcome? If not, why not? And that's where the schools, with the cooperation of the department, can put together a plan to figure out what it is they should be doing in order for their students to be getting to a statewide outcome. And then the mechanism for calculating statewide, or budgets for every school district based on student performance, that would also be revisited at least every, I forget, it's in the bill, it's every 5 years or every 10 years. I think it's not at least every 10 years. And from an engineering standpoint, makes a lot of sense, because you're starting with funding based on a goal, student outcomes, and then you're measuring that through the accountability section. When you start out with a funding or a budget mechanism based on how many desks in a classroom, one principal for every 500 students, stuff like that, then how does the accountability part work? Other than just measuring how much stuff that you've purchased. So I think from the standpoint of, does it make sense? Budget based on outcomes, fund to make sure that districts have access to the resources they need, and then accountability based on those outcomes makes a lot of sense. We can certainly, and I think the bill needs some work on how you define student outcomes. Marjorie, we've talked about that. Maybe standardized tests aren't the way to do it. I mean, right now we look at statewide assessment tests, graduation rates, and attendance rates. But there's a lot of other. That's what the department collects now. So that's what we had to work with. But maybe that's a place to start. And maybe it's something that the bill could also include some additional data collection from the department so that we can improve on our ability to measure student outcomes down the road. But it's a start. And
Obviously, we have a number of schools in the state that are meeting national standards, they're meeting our state standards, and their outcomes are very strong. Then why do we have to change formula for them? Why aren't we addressing the schools that are, and let me read this one section from this particular book, which was handed to me by the Department of Education. It says, if the current staff is unable to raise student achievement and the school district has failed to correct the problem, it is incumbent upon the state to get the school back on the right track. We endorse more local control and flexibility, but for that to be effective, the state must be prepared to act if the local school district, after a reasonable period of time, is clearly not getting the job done. Now, we have a number of school districts that aren't getting the job done. My question is, what have we done through the state to get them up to snuff? That's the accountability that, do we have the hammer to do that? Do we have the curriculum staff at DOE to do that?
Rick, on that,
Yes.
on that, I think I was going to follow up what David was saying. The dilemma that we've got is that right now, each school district gets $37.87 per student. Bing, you get the check, that's it. There's no follow-up. One size fits all. What we're suggesting here is that doesn't.
Excuse me, just one. We can't target that money though.
That's my point.
Okay.
Okay, you're ahead of me, Rick. That's the issue here, is that what we're trying to talk about here is how do you begin to identify where there are problems and provide the resources necessary to fill those problems. But here's the dilemma.
How do you avoid Claremont?
Here's the dilemma, though. Who helps those districts that are in need? The current State Department of Education doesn't have those resources. David just talked about getting more analysis and data collection. They can't do it now. So what we're suggesting here is not just a funding formula, but looking at what the Department of Education can do and hasn't been able to do. Don't forget, what is 85% of the current staff of the department is funded by federal funds?
I got all that, Mel, but I'm worried about when I say Claremont, I'm not talking about the town. I'm talking about the court decision.
Oh, okay.
The court decision with Londonderry and all that. Are we allowed to target money like this in the adequacy form, in the base and the differentiated component?
David.
Yeah. So let's address that, and if Representative Ames may want to talk a little bit about this too. This was an area that the School Funding Commission took a very significant look at, and we had a lot of testimony, as you remember, in this area as well. The term targeting goes back a long time, and for members of the committee, it means that the state would be giving more financial resources to some districts than to other districts, and in some districts it may be that those districts have access to all the financial resources they need to run their school district and to meet their budget needs. Since Claremont, New Hampshire implemented, as you said, Rick, basically a uniform costing / funding model that doesn't matter. Doesn't matter if you're the Newport School District or the Hopkinton School District or the Hanover School District or the Newcastle School District, you get the same costing / funding from the state in an amount pretty much what Mel said, about $4,200, something like that per student after you sort of wash it all out. And for some districts, well, for every district, and I think there's a lot of arguments that say $4,200 doesn't get you anywhere close to even the per pupil budget in the district that spends the least amount of money per pupil in the state, which is Manchester. Doesn't even get you halfway there, pretty sure. And but for other districts, that have access to tremendous resources, it does a lot for the students in those districts, but it hasn't done anything for Hanover. I mean, for Claremont, hasn't done anything for the plaintiff in the Claremont suit plaintiff towns. So I think our suggestion here is that trying something different to close those opportunity gaps across the state so that a student who goes to Newport or a student that goes to Claremont or Berlin or Pittsfield or Manchester has the same opportunities for success as a student who goes to Hopkinton or Bow or Bedford. And there's a couple ways. Well, there's a lot of different ways of achieving that. House Bill 1680 offers one way. The School Funding Commission report offers about a half a dozen different ways of doing it. This 1680 being one of them. One way of making it compliant with what with the chair's
interpretation.
Your interpretation of it, yes, Rick, is for the state to pay the first and last dollar, and on average $18,000, $19,000, $20,000 per student. That's going to put a significant challenge on state revenues. What 1680 does is starts with what we're spending right now, and works through organic, as economies grow, and can phase in over a 10-year period. Doesn't put any demands on new tax sources. It does clean up, I think, a constitutional problem that we have with the state property tax, but it doesn't put the state in a position where it's spending the first and last dollar for school districts on what districts are spending today, and it doesn't level set budgets for school districts. It doesn't say, all right, it's going to cost you reasonably, $15,000 per student, or $12,000 per student, or $20,000 per student. It doesn't do that either. It's actually looking at the differences and the challenges that every school district has. And I'm going to overuse something I say all the time, but it costs more to educate 1,000 kids in Manchester than it does 1,000 kids in Bedford. Why? Well, I could easily say it just does, but because the 1,000 kids in Manchester present significantly different challenges for the Manchester School District than the 1,000 kids in Bedford do. And so that's what 1680 contemplates. So it comes up with a budget or a cost, which is separate from funding. Currently, costing and funding is the same thing for every district. Comes up with the budget for cost, and then takes a look at a district's ability to access resources to fund that budget at a reasonable, through a reasonable local tax effort. And then the state targets the state funding to get the district the rest of the way. Is Manchester going to need more help? Yep, Manchester's going to need more help. Is Newcastle going to need more help? Nope, Newcastle's not going to need any more help. That's what that does. So it works with the state's existing $1 billion, plus or minus, what the state's currently spending on it. So it's a couple of things. It's fair for students, it's fair for taxpayers, and I think it's fiscally conservative. In terms of what sort of financial obligations it places on the state of New Hampshire for ensuring that every student gets an opportunity for an adequate education. And there's other ways you can do it, but I think I'm hopeful that someday we'll see something like this, and maybe it'll get challenged. But our current funding mechanism is getting challenged because it hasn't made a difference to students in Claremont or any of the plaintiff districts since the Claremont case was adjudicated. And certainly we can do better. And that's what 1680 attempts to do. And I'll work with I think Dick and Mel and I and Jay work with anybody to try to get there. At the final level, whatever we put in place has to be bipartisan. It's got to be durable. It's got to be something that stays around, for the next 10, 20 plus years.
So let's get back for a second to what Representative Cordelli had suggested. Let's look at the accountability section within this proposed legislation. And that's a concern I think I have as well, that if whatever we're going to do with a funding formula, how are we going to hold the districts accountable with this issue of local control? Or what kind of measure are we going to use to measure that they're performing to this outcome that we're desirous of achieving? Is it going to be the statewide assessment that we use? Is it going to be discipline in the schools? Is it going to be, the tenure of an individual, the longevity in there, the leadership within the facility, there's so many issues. The turnover of the darn local school board, that impacts it tremendously. The education levels within the community, there's so many factors, outcomes. How do you change some of those?
So
accountability.
So I think that's a great. I think there's a lot of factors that contribute to student outcomes. But what you can measure is student outcomes. I mean, this is I'd call it a quality control loop, and at the end of the day, what matters most is our student outcomes, and if a district is getting strong student outcomes by, the Hopkins School District may have a completely different, I don't know what we want to call it. I'm not an expert in this area. Faculty profile than the Concord School District or the Bow School District, but they don't have to be exactly the same. As long as the accountability part through student outcomes is being met.
Can we define that?
Well, currently in the bill, it's defined.
What page are you on?
I'm on page 10, down at line 34. Okay. And it's in this case says included but not limited to performance on statewide assessment tests, graduation rates, and attendance rates. And but I think you could have different ways of measuring outcomes, measuring student outcomes based on student performance. Doesn't have to be those. This was the data that we had so that we could evaluate it during the School Funding Commission work, and but it could be others as well. And but what's important about these three is that we've got these data for every district for the last decade, and we're able to look at how students performed in each district based on their based on those district budgets, and we're able to to look at the different characteristics in each district and then determine a way of predicting what a school district's budget would be to educate its students, their students, to a statewide outcome.
Okay. Representative Porter, then Tanner, and anybody over here? Representative.
I'm sure there's no way to really do this, but one way of measuring an effectiveness of an education is the future of the child or the student. And we never talk about what looking at the outcomes 5 years down the road from high school graduation. Where are our graduates? What are they doing? What kind of life are they living? Are they contributing members of society, or have they landed up on the streets? That's something that we really need to look at and evaluate, but yet we don't have a method in here at all. I mean, maybe this isn't the aspect of it, but it is an important thing. Are our students going out into the world and being civically engaged, economically surviving, and having, going on and being part of our general community and our democracy? Those are the things we need to be looking at. But we're always talking about standardized tests and graduation, which doesn't give us a clue about even some of these schools where we're talking about low performance. And I'm sure that if you looked at their graduation, their students after graduation, you'd find they're in the military, they're out in the workforce, they're married, they have families, they're working at their jobs, they're happy, productive members of society. Isn't that what we're after? And to get back, Representative Ladd, to the reading that you did from some book that you said, talking about you had gotten from the Department of Education, it sounded to me very much like what was the basis for the No Child Left Behind Act. The schools aren't doing their job, we've got to punish them. And it's time for the state to step in and do something. Well, that's exactly what the federal government tried to do with No Child Left Behind. Grading schools, they're going to close schools down, they're going to fire all the teachers and hire new ones because obviously they weren't doing what they were supposed to be doing. And that misses the point of why the performance is low. And we keep skirting around it because we don't want to identify what the real issue is. And the real issue, in my opinion, is economics. And we have to make sure that all kids have a fair chance. They're all starting at the same starting line. They're not all starting at the same starting line. What the kids that have European vacations when they're 5 years old are in a very different place than the kids who are at home with their mother or their grandmother watching television until they go to school. So until we can address that issue, I don't think it's fair for the state to say we're going to go in and punish these schools. If someone goes to the dentist and the dentist says, oh, you don't brush your teeth, you're going to get cavities, and they go home and they don't brush their teeth and they get cavities, is that the dentist's fault? Or is it the fault of something else? Thank you. I just had to get that off my. I'm not going to be here much longer, Mr. Chair, and I really have to get some of these things off of my chest. And this is one of them. I'm sick and tired of being blaming all the time on the schools who have people in there working their hearts out to do what's best for the kids. And if the kids are not achieving to what some artificial level that we say they should be achieving to, those teachers and those schools are made to feel like they're not very good. There's something wrong with them. Nobody wants to be part of them. And I take exception to that because I have never seen a teacher who didn't care.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Representative Tanner.
Thank you. I guess two things. One would be that I would like to see something in accountability that actually measures growth over time, that people don't get, schools vary so much from year to year. What students they have, what teachers they have, what things that may happen in the local community that makes quite a difference on perhaps how they do on testing and that sort of thing. So I think something has to, like Dave said, things have to be over a long period of time. I think the accountability needs to be taken over a long period, well, not as long maybe as 10 years, but a couple of years in a row or 5 years in a row. My other thought is that we have some schools in New Hampshire who have made tremendous turnarounds. Parker Varney is one of them that I remember going to a conference, and as Mel said, it started with leadership. It also started with collaboration with the Department of Education, but that was the school that turned it around. Pittsfield for a while made a turnaround, but then lost it because they couldn't sustain it. I think it would be important as part of this whole thing to look at schools that have made a turnaround and what made the difference. And I'm guessing that there are a few things that we're missing totally. I worked in a school district where we had so many people stay for so long, they had to offer us a bonus to leave. Okay. So, and why did people stay so long, and why did the school do really well? Well, one of the things was that the faculty, the teachers were intimately involved in all the decisions of the school. We felt as though we were part of it. It wasn't top-down management. We had, when we first started the school, we had a Department of Education under, I forget his first name, Marsden, Charlie Marsden, who came, organized a group that came to our school, talked to us about curriculum, spotted things in the community that we needed to do in order to get the community behind it, because we were one of the first open schools in the state of New Hampshire. And it was a radical change in how education was being given and what the school climate was going to be like and the curriculum itself. So, it was creative. We could actually do things as teachers. We were able to take the standards that were given us and be creative in what we did and work to our strengths, teach what people were strong at. English teachers were allowed to teach Shakespeare if that was their strong point. We've set so many regulations from the state down on what happens in the classroom and what happens in the schools. People are handcuffed, and it's really made it tough to teach. I mean, that's why you're getting teachers leaving. That's one of the big reasons you're getting teachers leaving. I can't tell you how many times I've talked to teachers. I know I've said it myself. I just want politics out of my classroom. And those people at the state level have no idea what's going on down in the school level. I said that and heard it and still hear it over and over again. So I think when we're talking about outcomes and we're talking about schools, and I know we're at a 30,000 foot level, but we also have to look at the 5 mile level or the 1 mile level or maybe the 50 feet level of being in that classroom and helping our teachers and feeling as though education is being supported in order for that to filter down to student outcomes, because the magic happens between the teacher and the student. That's where the magic happens.
Representative Cordelli, you had your hand up.
Yes, thank you. First, I don't know that the state is punishing any schools that are not performing. Going back to ESSA and the state plan for ESSA, and even before, the lower performing schools, I think it's 5 and 10% of the lowest performing schools were referred to as CSI, comprehensive support. I can't remember the exact acronym, but CSI and TSI schools. And they did get, according to the state plan, additional supports in terms of assistance and improvement plans and so forth, and working with the department to the extent that that improvement plan is in place today, and how much the level of those supports. I'd have to go back and look at the original plan. So there are supports for those lower performing schools. And I think we can't say that the state is punishing low performing schools. I don't think that is the case at all.
We're going to go over this here a little bit. Representative Nelson, you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Boy, what a wonderful conversation.
and I wish I was going to run again just to be part of all this. I see it a little, I agree with everybody on what they say. It's extremely important, but I just jotted down a few things. I always ask as a person, well, students, who was their best teacher in high school when they're out? And who was their least favorite, their worst teacher? And it's interesting to gather that information. The other one is that very common is the teacher teaches what they like. I've heard many times teachers teach the Civil War and they're supposed to do a whole bunch of stuff and they spend 3/4 of the year teaching the Civil War. How do you get involved and get that corrected, that the teacher teaches the curriculum from one end to the other rather than just what they like? Oh, two more things. Money doesn't save everything or solve everything. It doesn't for any of us. It's great to have money, but it doesn't. And exit interviews would be one, as I mentioned before. Let's see, two other things. Teachers don't always leave because of money. It's a big factor. I would agree a good percentage do. Many of them leave because they're not happy with the school via administration. You know, they're just, things aren't going right and they're just giving up. Now I'll throw out the time bomb on this whole thing, or explosion. I think, and I've been a union member my entire career, 2 different unions, and I support the unions. But sometimes they support teachers that aren't so good. How do we resolve that without getting the politics out or being anti-union to move out the teachers that are not helping? That's all I have to say.
Thank you. Representative Lekis.
I wanted to ditto what Representative Tanner said on motivating. On teacher and student is where the magic happens. And the regulations and the rules and all of this stuff gets in the way of the teacher. I know when I did my student teaching, I was so disgusted because I was doing math. Math, you have to have all the pieces to move on to the next pieces. And I was given and I loved my students in my classes who were missing a lot of pieces. And I spent a lot of time picking up those pieces, but I had to be at the same place, the same day as everybody else, but my students weren't the same as everybody else. And I worked my butt off to try to get my students there. And I can remember begging, can I have one more week? Just one more week, my kids are almost there. But no, I couldn't. I had to be at this place and I had to go on even though my kids weren't there yet. And I talked to other math teachers and they were making the same complaints and they were like, and I just felt, and we kind of agreed that the system was set up for students and teachers to fail. That's what it felt like. And that's something we need to be looking at. It doesn't have to do with funding. It has to do with how are we doing the schools? Are we letting teachers teach? Are we trying to treat every student, every kid, every whatever exactly the same and march them along in this, you must be here, you must be here, you must be here, without taking any account of who the kids are, what their background is, what they know. Just like Rep. Porter was saying, kids are very, very different. And they come from different backgrounds and they have different strengths and weaknesses. And how do we address that? That's my question.
So, Representative Ford.
I was sitting over here and I whispered to my colleagues sitting here the one word I had not heard in this entire discussion, and it was qualitative. No one mentioned changing the quality of what we're doing. We talked about how many people we needed, what kind of support, numbers, all that sort of thing. But if you absent qualitative achievement from a discussion of finance, I can guarantee you, you will not get what you want in outcome. It's just not possible. We need to address that elephant in the room as well. We may not be preparing teachers to do what we want them to do. And we need to involve them in this discussion too. So I would say that this discussion needs to include the teacher preparation institutions as well as all we're talking about here, because if we don't educate the communities for what to hire for, and then they in turn will, by their hiring practices, change the nature of what's going on in the teacher preparation process, we'll never have the outcomes we're looking for. It has to be a component. Just tell you one little factoid that many of you will never experience. When you enlist in the Marine Corps, you finish high school. That's fine. You wave your high school diploma, they sign you up. The first thing they do is give you an examination. And you get a score. I've forgotten what the test is called, but I'll find out again and pass it on to you. And that score determines what schools you get to go to, what kind of training you have. Every single thing they do in training a Marine has an educational theory substantiating it, down to the order of doing push-ups and pull-ups and all the physical stuff, and when you do it, and how it comes out, and how then you apply those skills. That's all sequenced. I don't think we do that much in our public schools. Now, not everybody is a concrete sequential learner or whatever. It's true, we like all get lumped together. But I think we need to be teaching smarter. And I think we're not letting or enabling that to happen, as we keep talking about with the fine teachers, and not requiring those others who aren't teaching that well, maybe this is not the field for you. Enough said.
I think this group's abstract random. And Representative Luno.
So thanks, Rick. I got Oliver. Just a follow-up question. What you're talking about. So I want to take a couple of school districts. Hopkinton, where I live. It's about 15 minutes from here, and I think our average student in Hopkinton, I'm not looking at it right now, but somehow I think the average student in Hopkinton performs at about the 84th, 85th percentile statewide. You go up the road a half hour from Hopkinton to Newport, and the average student in Newport performs at about the 4th percentile statewide. I'm trying to understand how. And honestly, I think a lot of our discussion has been about quality, because when we're talking about student outcomes, that's a quality assessment of how students are performing. We can disagree on the specific assessments, but it is a quality assessment. But how do you explain, based on what you just said, the difference in outcomes from Hopkinton and then going a half hour up the road? And half hours, the reason I'm putting that out there is it's not 3 hours up the road. It's not 5 hours up the road. It's a half hour up the road. Are they hiring the wrong teachers, not enough teachers, too many teachers, teachers that aren't, teaching that are teaching something different? What do you attribute, based on what you just said, to that such a stark difference between student outcomes in districts that are only a half hour apart?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
do they commingle ballots? Is it required to commingle ballots where multiple towns send somebody to school?
Mingle ballots.
Where they will put all the towns together, and then they count the ballots without knowing how each town voted. When I was in Vermont, and we're going back a long time ago, they used to commingle them. So we never knew what our local school or town how they felt about the school, because the number would be 1,000 or whatever, and we had a small school. We never knew how they felt as a town for their elementary school, but I don't know what they do here in New Hampshire.
No, they don't commingle.
Good.
Yes. Good morning.
Morning. Thank you.
Representative Litchfield.
I love the discussion that we're having today, and I feel like it's probably the most productive discussion I've sat in on over the past 2 years. So I just want to start by saying it makes me really happy. I agree with something that just about everybody here has said, and I keep going back to the money where we talk about, when we talked about this before, putting more money into the schools. I do feel like it's deeper, and I don't know how to fix it, but I don't know if it's something we need to look at, maybe more of the before or the after school programs. We're saying that it's something that has to do with the home life versus what's happening during the school day. I'm wondering if we can take a deeper dive into the socioeconomic aspects of things and try to figure out how to help these kiddos that way. I don't know if that's too big for us here, but this is what's been weighing on me for quite a while. And then the other question that I have for you, we're talking about kind of the bandwidth or how much money these schools have, right, to support their students. We talk about, let's say, a Hopkinton versus a Newport, right? The state is giving a certain amount, and we're saying what these communities can or cannot afford on their own. But what determines that? My perception has been it's the tolerance of the community, for lack of a better word, right? Their threshold or their tolerance, because the money that's being spent on these budgets is being put forth by the administrators or the school board. But the final amount is being determined at deliberative session and or on election day. Is that a fair assessment of what the towns across the state can afford? Or is it what those voters are choosing to put toward education? And I don't know the answer to that. It's just a thought I've had while we were discussing this. Thank you.
Boy, that's got a lot of questions in it, and what you're asking us. I'll try to address a situation which happened in this state. Years ago, White Mountain Community College had an academic center in my community. And it got to the point where White Mountain could no longer afford to supply staff for that academic center, which was part of White Mountain Community College, simply because there was not enough students participating in the program within the community. Ray Burton and I worked like the devil to try to keep that center there, and worked with the superintendent of schools, and he was very interested. But when it got beyond that level in the schools, the principal did not engage, and the community as a result, who worked with that principal, did not engage. And for a long time, people were thinking, well, it's how this community aspires to education. The aspiration of what my child's going to be when they leave school. They said, well, they're not going to need college. They're going to go off and work in the woods, or they're going to become diesel mechanics or a career tech center, or they're going to, that type of skill orientation, which now I wish a lot more would do, because you could probably get more money in those skills than you can in some of the things coming out of college with. But at any rate, we lost our academic center. And I equate that loss not necessarily to what we tried as a legislature. We tried like the devil. We worked with the chair of the State Board of Education. We worked with the community college system. We worked with the trustees. And Ray Burton was the person back in those days, and he couldn't make any headway either. It was, I think, a result of leadership in that particular facility that they didn't take advantage of the academic program that was there. There was a lot of things that the organization, the transparency of staff, and all there, we just didn't have support locally in the schools. And so the quality of your staff and the quality of the staff in the way that staff works with the community is very important. But I also say to all of us here that there is a need for this data. Decision making is oftentimes driven by data. That's a reality of our society. Anytime we go to the legislature, we're going to ask for more money for something. We're going to say, show me your sound data that justify that increase or wherever you're going. And when I worked the other day with the folks over in the data processing of DOE with Caitlin Davis and Nate Green, who's in charge of research and the Assessment Improvement Performance Program. And my question initially to them was, what are we doing? We know that many of the students coming back to school are 5 months, if not more, behind in mathematics. Same thing basically in reading as well, as a result of this pandemic. Mathematics is not necessarily just related to the pandemic. We've always been kind of slippery in that area over the years here. There's been a waterfall effect when the kids hit the middle school, and when they get to the high school, they were not performing the way they should. And that's why we had remediation at the community college level. 60% of the kids had to have remediation, which 50% never got an associate's degree. That's a problem. So I asked, what are we doing with these assessment results at the department? We get the scores posted to us. They're on the web immediately upon taking that test. But are you doing the deep dive? Some districts are just throwing out their whole math program, starting over from scratch. Or can you tell me what specific areas within mathematics instruction and curriculum were weak in? Well, we don't do an analysis of that test that deep down, and we want to, but we don't have the personnel to do that. I heard the analysis spoken to earlier. There is a bill in there now to provide the department, the staff, to do that deep dive and analysis of our math results. Maybe it's enumeration, maybe it's summary and geometry, maybe it's this or that. We don't know. And the schools don't have the staff to do this either. They take those results, they use them, they share them with parents, and they look at them, and oftentimes they make that quick decision, well, we got to do something about this curriculum, we're going to rewrite the whole darn thing. Maybe that's not necessary. So I think part of the issue is we've looked at the quality of, the staff there in the schools, but also I look at the staff we have at Department of Education. Do we have the support there from DOE in those curriculum areas we once had those curriculum coordinators and staff for? Do we have the data analysis going over there, which is looking at the research and the content that we're using are we speaking to how to really improve, or are we just, doing, more of the same old? I believe we're not doing the analysis the way we should. And that's why I will support an analysis position over there to do that deep dive with school districts and share that. So when I'm developing curriculum which is my responsibility at the local level, I'm doing a revision of curriculum that's in line with what the state standards are. And so we've had this, I think, a gulf between DOE and what's happening in the schools. And I don't think it's intentional. I think it's lack of staffing. 80% of the staff over there are federally funded employees. Looking at Title I, looking at this, looking at that, but they're not doing what we need to have done. And so we're not funding that right either. So we look at trying to change what we're doing in our funding of adequacy. We need to look farther afield to find out how we're going to support the schools. And I don't think we're doing an adequate job as a state, because local control. You have instruction, you have curriculum, so we're out of that game. Representative Leckis.
Speaking of assessment, I've been thinking about this a bunch, and I think you really have to follow individual students and how they're doing and whether they're improving in their areas, and not take an average of a class. Anybody who's been in a school knows that different classes have different cultures, different abilities. You can have one class that are very studious and the next class that like to goof around. And it seems, and you see that, right? So comparing that way is not going to work, but we have the ability. Every kid takes these tests. We have the results. I think we need to be looking to see, is each student improving? Is that student improving? And we have the ability to do that now with this position.
I think, cutting in, I think some schools are doing this. I think they're tracking the cohort. If you're a third grader in 2006, 7-year, fourth grader, fifth grader, sixth grader, they're following that cohort, but they're also looking at individual students.
Yeah, and
That's being done. That's a best practice. But when I spoke with Nate Green the other day over at DOE, they are just starting to do this. And we will have a legislative oversight committee on September 27th when they're going to come in and present that information to us. And they're going to do it by cohort, by grade levels, kids following that, seeing where exactly things are going askew. But that's beyond where you're talking about the individual. I'm talking now about state and hopefully individual school districts, and we don't have that data yet. But we have the state. We'll be looking at those cohorts. Those sheets will be handed out then with the recent testing data from this last school year. Yes, Representative Woodcock.
Thank you. I have several comments about. I will try to put them back down. I want to go back to what Representative Tanner said. The quality of instruction is the difference in that classroom when you shut that door. And all the factors that go into teacher training, teacher professional development, pay, attrition, all those things. And the other one we haven't even mentioned is where the students are developmentally. Where are they? And the better instruction you have, those teachers can identify within that classroom setting where each youngster needs to work. But they have to have the toolbox to bring each youngster along. The answer is in the classroom initially. So I think that's a key we've forgotten about because that helps terrifically. The other part is just reflecting on what we're talking about the scores. I mean, we do test item analysis. We can identify right down to what particular fundamental math skill is not done and where they lost it, where they missed it, by looking at class reports and what teacher didn't do or did do it. So that can be done. But I would agree that the DOE has not been on the ball because they spent too much downtime over the last 4 or 5 years. You talk about a principal of a school or administrator of a school district, we have the same thing with the commissioner of education. He's out there creating a hell of a lot more programs. Just think if he took all the time and investment of money and put public education first. So it goes right across the board. I mean, we as a state and a commissioner and DOE has not invested all their funds into relooking at how to make these things better along the way. We will talk about schools and teachers and administrators. So it's not just that point, but clearly the quality of instruction in the classroom is the fundamental piece that makes schools succeed and makes kids succeed.
Yeah, and just to follow up on that, you know, when I came in here in the House, I wanted to see these so-called curriculum frameworks, which are guidelines, which don't exist.
Gone.
They were gone way back when. They've been gone for, of course, we no longer have it in statute because they weren't doing them. But if I wanted to find out what the physical education curriculum was for this state, I'd have to go back to what, 2004?
Yep.
And so, we have standards which are in ED 306, but that's not what we need.
And that's not this commissioner's fault now. That's a leadership from the DOE.
That's been going on in the Department of Education in this state. I was very surprised when I moved to this state and I went to the department to try to get all this curriculum information. My school district where I was before had more staff than this DOE has. And we had that, all our curriculum, CRT curriculum reference tests for each area, we wrote those ourselves. So, you know, I think that if we want to see improvement, we're going to have improvement beyond just this funding formula, which I concur. We need to change this around. We need more accountability within it. And we probably need to, I don't know if we need to if $20,000 per student is a lot of money for a student. Now, granted, it's not state money, it's property tax money as well, local money. But we need to reorient, I think, where the dollars might be used more effectively. It's not always more money, it's how effective we're using our current money. And that is a question that we need to address when we're looking at this costing formula. How effective is the current formula being used? That money. And we've addressed that with SWEP a little bit, but I think that's a component that this group right here, we got to discuss that before we do anything this
I would
year.
agree with that as well, Representative Lab, but all districts don't have that pot of money to work with. If they don't have that money, that's what this program is 1680 will at least start to develop. So there is a pot of money that everyone has an equal shot. You're absolutely correct. If we don't have the money to work with, then it doesn't matter because you can't get what you need done.
It's pretty tough when you have 196 districts, or how many have we ever had in the state, you know, for everybody to be replicating what everybody else is doing. That's not effective use of the coin. Representative Luno, and then Representative Cordelli.
Thanks very much, Rick. I just wanted to talk on a couple of points that were just made by you and actually Representative Litchfield as well. But one of the things that 1680 does, based on the School Funding Commission work, is, and this is a really important part, when looking at what it would cost a district to educate its students to a statewide outcome, it looks at it. First of all, it gets away inefficiencies, because that's one of the things about looking at all school district budgets over a decade in student outcomes. They're able to identify inefficiencies in school budgets, and then look at a way to develop school budgets based on achieving those outcomes. So you could look at for instance, and I'll pick the two examples that Melissa and I used, Newport and Hopkinton. You could look at the number of students that live in low-income households, number that are special education, the different factors that we do. Look at the student outcomes in there, and then look at how those budgets were built and what they were, what their spending categories were, and essentially be able to baseline them, so that now if I know that a school district has a certain, a higher or a lower number of special education students, or a higher or lower number of students that come from low income backgrounds, how much it would cost for those districts to deliver an adequate education based on students achieving a statewide average. So to your point, Rick, a large part of this work was to identify the inefficiencies, but more importantly, identify the efficiencies that lead to student outcomes, and how that reflects across districts with different student characteristics. The other point that I think Representative Litchfield was talking about, and Representative Woodcock mentioned it as well. At what point do you look at a district's access to resources and say, that's all we're going to spend, I don't want to spend a dime more, fourth percentile is good enough for us, versus I'm just tapped out. There's not a dime more that I can spend on our school district, and we still can't raise the money for an adequate budget so that I can get an adequate student outcome. And when you take a look at Hopkinton, yep, we're near the top in the state in terms of how much we're spending on our tax rate. We got some unique things in our community. I think it definitely has a diverse socioeconomic mix, but and this is a stressful time. And I spent 12 years in front of taxpayers, Janet Bennett, all those meetings, and it's pretty stressful, because you've got a lot of people with substantial means that nobody likes paying property taxes, but we want to have great schools, so we raise the money, and I think we pass more budgets than we lose in Hopkinton. But then you go half hour up the road to Newport. Guess what? They're paying nearly the same tax rate as what we're paying in Hopkinton, and they can't even fund on a per student basis 70% of the budget that we're funding in Hopkinton. They're tapped out. They're just tapped out. And I think that's really what we're saying here. And I think it goes to what Steve was saying, in terms of where, how can the state use its precious limited resources to make sure that students aren't paying the price when taxpayers get tapped out. And finally, that's what they're doing. And actually, we wouldn't be breaking new ground in this area because Massachusetts does it. They've been on the road to their Massachusetts Chapter 70 plan, which recognizes it. That you know what, the taxpayers in Lawrence shouldn't be working 6 times harder than the taxpayers in Wellesley and getting, poor student outcomes because they can't even fund the budget that they should, that they need to be competitive in a global market, global economy. And so big points. And I think Melissa was right on when asking that question. How do we know? How do we know? Well, you can take a look at the student outcomes and you can take a look at the tax rates in a lot of these communities. They're trying super hard. They just can't get there. And we're trying super hard in Hopkinton too, but we do get there. But that's obviously we have a very socioeconomically diverse demographic across our state as well. And if the state is going to take its obligation to assuring that every student has an opportunity to an adequate education, then take that seriously. And I do believe the state takes it seriously. You just take a look at what they're spending right now. $1 billion a year. That's as far as general fund / education trust fund. I mean, that's the biggest pile of that's the biggest expense our state has. And certainly when you take a look at all in with the local property taxpayers, which is about double that, it's about another $2 billion. All in, we're $3 billion on public schools. It's an enormous price tag. We get a lot for the state's collective $3 billion. Top 5, student outcomes nationally, but not every district's getting that. And that's why, I think 1680 looks to provide a little bit of fairness, actually a lot of fairness, into making sure that the kids up in Newport, get a fair shake too. I mean, I've spent a dozen years on the board making sure that the kids in Hopkinton get a fair shake, and as a taxpayer, a lifetime taxpayer in Hopkinton, making sure that our kids get a fair shake. But Newport needs some help too. Pittsfield needs some help too. So many other places.
Representative Cordelli?
Thank you. I just have to go back to some prior comments and disagree in that I think that the commissioner and the department have done a fantastic job in programming to help students. You have, scholarship programs. You have summer scholarship programs for students. You have reading training for teachers and adults, free tutoring available. I think that they've done a marvelous job. Sometimes maybe getting the word out to parents and others about availability of these programs is an issue that we could do better at. But I think that they've done a great job in trying to help students and recover the learning loss from the pandemic.
Representative Tanner, and then Representative Lex.
I think we have to realize too that it's a vicious cycle. Public schools are kind of a keystone of a community, and I live in Sunapee, and 10 minutes down the road is Newport. And Sunapee is rated even higher than Hopkinton, I think. And we spend more money, and my taxes are a lot lower than Newport's, okay? But Newport, because it's so close and because it is a town I represent until December, it's a vicious cycle for them. Okay, the schools aren't doing well. They can't afford what's happening there. The people they hire at the administrative level or at the business administrator, you talk about how many different superintendents Claremont had. I can't tell you how many business administrators, different ones they've had at Newport. And the new ones come in, don't know the system, they don't know how to get grants, they don't know how to effectively use the money. So the school is, it's a vicious cycle within the school. The teachers leave because they aren't getting paid. The townspeople are upset with the school, so they're constantly on their backs. It's, to go to a school board meeting is a difficult thing because people are yelling at each other versus some other school districts, Kearsarge, for example, where people are very calm and very supportive of the school. But it also affects the community. The community can't get businesses there. They have one major business, Ruger's, and if that goes, boy, there are going to be some hurting. So they have to be very careful how they deal with Ruger's. The school district, the kids coming out of the school district, there's been some that have gone on to really great colleges, Harvard, Dartmouth, done well at UNH, that sort of thing. But a number of them have gone on to those colleges and they can't take it because they're coming from that kind of community and they don't have the support at home, they don't have the support with the community, and they have the skills, but they just can't deal with what's before them. And oftentimes they drop out of college and they come back and then they have student loans. So what we're doing is so important, not only for the kids of New Hampshire and the students of New Hampshire, but it's important to all the communities in New Hampshire, particularly the ones like Berlin, Newport, Manchester, because it's making a difference in their economic ability. It's making a difference in their daily lives. It's making a difference in what opportunities the kids have there and how that community thrives throughout. And we're not just educating for soldiers to make everybody, into a little soldier that has the same basis. We're not educating kids necessarily to be workers. We're educating them, as Marjorie said, for a human being, for a productive member of society. And that might mean an artist, or it might mean a musician, or it might mean an engineer, or it might mean somebody going into the Marines, okay? But it means everybody. It can't be just the qualitative things can't be so tight that we're losing sight of the whole child and comprehensive school education.
Okay, Mel, and then I'd like to speak.
Thanks, Rick. Let me get back to the 30,000 foot here for a second. There is a threshold question here that school funding needs to address. And that is a thing that I've said all along, and that is, are we concerned about our kids or my kid? Think about that. The issue of our kids looks at all kids around, all students, I hate that term, kids, all students across the state. And if you're worried about developing a workforce, we can't just be worried about the students in Hopkinton or isolated students in Bedford or in Newport. We need to begin to look at what is the opportunity for all of our kids. Because if I'm going to come in, if I'm a business person and I want to start a business, I'm not looking at just one community, because I'm going to be gathering students and workers from a variety of different communities. And so I think one of the things that we did on the commission was really looked at the concept of our students across the state. And where are those students that need help? As David was saying, there are communities that are tapped out. And what's the responsibility of the state to look at those communities and to provide some resources there that they may not be able to provide for themselves just because their tax base is much lower than others across the state. So for me, the question is how do we take the resources that we currently have in our state? And that's what the commission looked at. The commission looked at what's the billions of dollars that we're currently providing for? How do we allocate those in a different way that can help those students and look at the issue of our kids in a generic way across the state rather than just looking at what my child is getting in a particular community? I know that's a tough question to deal with because we all want the best for our child. But there's a greater whole out here that this bill is trying to address. And I know it's a very difficult concept because it's so intricate. It's got so many parts to it, but I would hope that this committee, based upon the conversations that we have had and will have, will say, this is an issue, folks. We need to look at this in a systemic kind of a way and create a system that's fair for our kids in the state. Thanks, Rick.
Thank you very much, Mel. Oh, go ahead.
I wanted to go back to what Rep. Porter had said about the number one thing which determines outcome is the education level of the parents. And I saw that in Nashua because Nashua is one school district, right? And they have the same people, the same school board, the same everything, and yet the different schools have different outcomes. And you look at it, it's not because one school has access to more money than another school has, because it's all one district. But it's drawing, the schools are neighborhood schools, and they're drawing from different education levels of the parents, and it makes a huge difference. So I think before we say, oh, well, let's just give these guys more money, let's look at what is it that makes the difference in those kids, in how they do based on the education level of their parents, and what are we going to do in the school that's going to make up for whatever it is that that isn't happening or is happening or whatever. I think before we start divvying up money, we need to figure out what is it for. How can we make a difference? What is the difference between what's going on with the kids who have a better educated parents and those that don't? Because you see it in Nashua, and that has nothing to do with how much money a community can have or any of that, because it's all the same community, it's all the same school district. It's different types of neighborhoods with different types of education of the parents. And so I hate to just throw money at something and say, well, give it more money and it'll magically happen. I think we need to be looking at underlying issues. What can we actually do to make a difference?
Thank you. We're getting close to lunch here, and I had planned on having a presentation from DOE today on special education this afternoon, but she was not available. But what I'd like to do is that we've had a good discussion on our situation we have in terms of the foundation formula for the state of adequacy and funding of it. And I think we all have in our own minds of where we'd like to be. But the question is, how are we going to get there? I think what we need to do is that we need to each of us take 1680 between now and the time we meet again, look down at that and say, does this have some of the elements within it that are going to get us to that target we want to get to in terms of funding education in our state? At the end of this whole discussion, we as a subcommittee have the responsibility of making a recommendation, either up or down, or up with recommendations, down for some reason, whatever, to the full education committee. And then that, of course, report goes into the calendar for the whole community or legislature to have. So I'd like to, between now and the time we meet again, look at 1680, renew yourself with what's in here, then come back and say, here's some of the real components of that I like. here's some areas that maybe that need to be looked at and some healthy discussion on. I don't want to come in here and not spin our wheels, but discuss all the reasons why we have this before us. We know those reasons. We know them, that there's, there are the communities that are like the Berlins of the world and the Newports of the world. And then we do know that there's the Lebanons of the world and the communities which have the wherewithal and actually can show us what they're doing is great. Their scores reflect that, and the kids are going on to the world of work and with the skills that they need. My community may not need to have students going off with all those type of skills. They may need some other type of skills which are taught through a different way, but it's all part of our world. There is different than the world down in Rochester, so or Portsmouth. So yes.
A question. Our task here, I believe, is to make one of two recommendations, right?
Mm-hmm.
One is no, we don't recommend any further action or further legislation, or yes, we need further legislation. Those are the two options.
With that latter option you've mentioned, yes, we need further legislation, okay. But we've also attached on many of the issues we've discussed recommendations to improve upon or to change to get that going forward. I think that's a very important component. So that's what we've got to really start honing in on, is if we can, and we should, everybody should be taking a healthy look at this bill and looking over and saying, because I can look at that bill too, and there are a lot of areas I like. There were some areas which I had questioned. I don't know how to measure the attitude of the teacher in the classroom. I don't know whether they're, that's the quality teacher or not, or other than through the local principal doing the observations saying you don't meet what we have for our goals in this school or the standards of the state. Or how do you measure the parent and involvement and work that, we know that we have a lot of issues. That other health impaired category within the IEPs is skyrocketing on us, and that's a result of the pandemic and some of the parenting skills that have gone on, and the kids not being in schools. So there are a lot of issues that a test is not necessarily going to be the answer to assess that. But in order to attain the goal I have of really helping the districts which need the help, what are their specific needs, and will additional dollars do that? I want to really delve into that a little bit myself. And I think we need to, and would you please grab a copy of that if you don't have one, that recommission.
There are two boxes.
Two boxes of them.
And I would recommend just a big document.
Yeah.
But there is an executive summary that does a really good job of outlining what the executive summary of the recommendation is.
Yeah. Now, don't let the dollar figure of anything scare you away. Let's look at the policy decisions within that and the elements. I know that we will be looking at dollars, but for this committee, we want to look, will this get to where we need to get?
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
Could you tell us about the book that you have over there, the name of it and the author, please?
Sure. It's called Schoolhouses, Courthouses, and State Houses. And believe it or not, when I talked with Bill Ardinger just last Friday, he said, this book basically says we're looking for performance outcomes. We're looking exactly what the bill is trying to do as well. It doesn't get down in all the key elements that are within the bill, but it does say outputs, performance is what we want to be looking at. So there's a lot of parallels in this book here. And it's yes, it came out a few years ago, it's older, but there's a lot of good research there. Then we don't want to throw it out. So I would encourage, if you can get a hold of something like this, look it over. It's kind of boring to read all the parts within it, but it has some chapters which are kind of meaty. You may have liked it. So, okay, so yes. March.
I was wondering, there's a interim study bill that I filed. There's no meeting has been scheduled for yet. I'm just wondering if we do intend to meet or
Which bill is that?
April 16th.
Okay. Let's see. Pardon me? So we do have a subcommittee identified. Okay. Okay, Glenn,
Actually, I don't know if we do.
I believe there was for each of the
yeah,
ones. I'll take a look at scheduling. I was
yeah.
tied up with the primary.
The interims for the co-ops is this Thursday. Let's go down through any other things which we have on the docket here. If I can find the schedule book here. What's underneath here? Everybody has down on the 27th, the Legislative Oversight Committee. That's where Nate Green comes in. We'll be doing the overview and trying to take these cohorts of the assessment, taking them through. That's at 10 o'clock right here. Excuse me, it's 1 o'clock. 1 o'clock in the afternoon. Pardon me? On the 27th, that's a Tuesday. Jay, when's the next teacher shortage meeting?
The next scheduled meetings are tomorrow at 10 a.m. and the next one after that is October 4th
Yes.
at 1 p.m. And then we'll be meeting every other Wednesday, beginning the 20th and 19th of October at 10 a.m.
A lot of these issues are all linked. And so if you're able to attend some of these other meetings, it might be wise to try and just get a handle, because I know we will be in that shortage meeting looking at the pipeline. And that's the pipeline meaning post-secondary education, how that's impacting public education, availability of certification, certification of people, and getting more information from those education departments. Important stuff.
The 27th, that a full committee meeting?
The 27th, that's the Legislative Oversight Committee. That's a statutory committee. That's already been scheduled, but what's going to be presented at that might be, wise that you come and participate.
Rick?
Yeah.
If I can, so this is a committee actually that had been a statutory committee in law for a number of years and hadn't met in a while. And then it was let go.
It was let go by us.
And then we
reformatted it or redid it yet.
We put in a new bill this year to reestablish this. So this will be the first meeting of it. And I think, like I said, it hasn't met in a while.
This will become very active because it's about improvement and performance of our academic standards.
Right. And there's a lot of activity going on right now with Ed Rules 306. Yeah. And so this is an area that this statutory committee has some jurisdiction in this area.
Yes. So, what we want to do is look at the next time. That was the next thing on the docket here in the calendar. Are there any days which are not good for folks on the committee here? Sue?
I'm going to schedule the school meals people at 2 p.m. on October 6th.
October 6th. Okay. Are you getting into any discussion on the Medicaid?
Briefly, just the concept of automatic identification and implementation of meals through direct certification, but we
I know it's a little off from what your
yeah,
mission is, but
discussed it, but it doesn't really relate to the bills that we were looking at. So we haven't really gone anywhere with it. This morning, the New Hampshire Hunger people came in and talked to us, and she mentioned direct certification.
How about me in the morning?
um,
Yeah.
how much time do you need everybody to review 1680 and really come up with some good questions and to share some of your thoughts on whether it contains elements or some areas which, you know, we need to discuss the specifics of the bill. We need to get down into that. So it's a couple weeks needed. If that is, then we could meet that week that we just talked about, but
How about the third, Monday?
on Monday? Yeah, that's open for myself. We'll be here the 3rd, the 4th, and the 6th. Is the 3rd good for everybody? Okay, well, it's not gonna work then. That's the advisory group? Where are you meeting? Right here? At Granite State?
No, no, you have to ask me now. No? I'll get it.
Okay. Okay,
We do an afternoon meeting on that, Representative Pyle? Representative Rowley?
South Street, 100 South Fruit Street.
what?
100 South Fruit Street.
Fruit Street?
One of the other DOE locations.
Oh, DOE, huh? Okay, so on what day?
Third.
The 3rd? Yeah, that's fine. 1 o'clock.
Yeah, I won't be in attendance, but that's fine. If I have specifics, I will share them with Mel and Dave and ask them to bring them forward.
Is a Monday good for everybody?
Yes.
That's Labor Day in Australia. Okay,
So we'll Labor Day.
pardon me? 1680 only. Okay, so,
I have all my notes on 1680 right here in my notebook. I'm all ready to go.
okay, please look at it and write stuff down because we need to get on with it. We're gonna have to make a recommendation here shortly. Okay, no more said. Thank you for coming. We're adjourned. Yes,
Say one quick comment.
yeah.
It was about a comment made earlier, so it's not really about the bill as much, but I think Representative Nelson said about the unions and they protect bag teachers and it's, so we were talking about the quality of teachers and I don't think that that's actually accurate. I think the whole, my experience from negotiations is that we negotiated differentiated teacher evaluation plans with the whole goal of if teachers aren't doing as well as they should be, then there's a plan put forth to how do they get better. Or if they don't perform, then they can release them. But there's a step. So I just wanted to say, I think years ago, maybe that was the way it was. But right now, I think we do have evaluation plans for teachers to improve. And if they don't, then there's a consequence for that. That's all.
Thank you.
And I actually, one more, just in response to Representative Lakis, in terms of money and programs, like even in my district, when they were trying to address those kids that needed extra help, then they instituted the response to intervention, RTI, and that costs money. So even in a district that has funds, I mean, all of these, there are things that these schools do to help these kids that aren't performing as well, that do cost money. So that's all.
Nothing's free.
Nothing's free.
Thank you. Have a good one.
Lynn